Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners Board Briefing. Commissioner Vince Jones-Dixon is excused, and Vice Chair Julia Brim-Edwards is present virtually. Audience members, I want to start by asking you to please silence your electronic devices. For those presenting today, please turn your mic on when you begin speaking and off when you've completed your remarks. For all presenters, please state your name for the record before speaking or responding to questions. So we have three work sessions this morning, and we have 3 hours to do them, a little less than 3 hours. So I'm going to be watching time and trying to keep everyone moving so that we have time for full discussion on all the items today. Our first work session is Preschool for All. This is a continuation of a session that we had a couple weeks ago where we did run out of time. So I want to invite the presenters down to the table because I know we really want to jump into some of the slides that had been put together for the last one that we weren't able to get to. So I want to thank the Eco Northwest project team for returning to give us an update on the TAG and the PEG's work. And I wanted to just turn it over to Commissioner Singleton before we get started to see if she had any comments.
Thank you, Chair. Just again, appreciate y'all coming back. I think I don't want to take a ton of time, but just a little bit of a refresher that the work session is for us to start to really answer some of the questions that have come from the board, hear from you all about how those are being integrated into the TAG and PEG work so that we can have the information we need to make some decisions about either the tax or the program, kind of big picture policy. So really looking at some of those big budget levers as well as some of the programmatic pieces that we've been discussing with staff as well as some of you all. So I will hand it over so we can jump right in.
All right, well, thank you. And good morning. So each of you should have received an updated slide deck yesterday, and those slides were updated per the questions and comments that came out of our meeting on November 6th. In order just to clarify some more pieces of the work. For the record, my name is Stephen Herrera. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor for Safety Net Services in the Chair's office, and I'm gonna take you through today's presentation. So next slide, please, Tasia. So today we're going to give you an overview of the Technical Advisory Group, the Program Advisory Group, and articulate their roles and responsibilities. We'll also talk about the Preschool for All Community Engagement Report and findings, give you an overview of those. And then Eco Northwest and team will take us through phase 1 findings and phase 2 milestones, and we'll close with next steps, and then we'll give it back to you all for discussion. Next slide, please. So the TAG is an advisory body of subject matter experts whose charge is to guide and evaluate the financial integrity of the Preschool for All program. The program is charged with reviewing, the group is charged with reviewing the program's ongoing revenue needs and issuing recommendations regarding Preschool for All tax to ensure sustainable funding, assess the adequacy of county revenues, monitor fiscal trends, and support equitable early learning access. The Program Advisory Group will create recommendations on what kinds of policy program changes would be necessary to respond to those tax policy changes considered by the TAG, as well as budget opportunities or pressures caused by a change in population forecasts. They will do this in alignment with the original intent of the ballot measure and the commitment to equity as a guiding principle. Next slide, please. So in addition to the contracts that were shared with each of your offices that outline the scope of work, deliverables, and associated costs, this chart was developed to illustrate the role and function of county staff and our contracted partners as we carry out the work to support the TAG and the PAG. Next slide, please. So this chart illustrates the current PFA, Preschool for All, advisory and engagement bodies that exist within the county. The chair's office is responsible for the appointment of these members to the short-term technical advisory group and the program advisory group, also known as the TAG and PAG. Although these groups will advise the entire board, the chair values having diversity of perspectives on each committee, which is reflected in these appointments. The chair also appoints the board, and the board approves the membership of the Preschool for All Advisory Committee. This group was established in 2021 to provide high-level guidance on implementation. The Preschool and Early Learning Division, also known as PEL, is establishing 2 additional groups that will provide feedback on implementation, implementation from the perspective of families and preschool providers. This creates opportunities for ongoing dialogue and partnership around program changes such as PFA policies, provider expectations, and new outreach strategies to families. This input will help PEL, the Preschool and Early Learning Division, to improve the experience of both families and providers. The division is responsible for the selection process of these feedback groups. And the Preschool and Early Learning Division will speak more in more detail about this at their briefing in December. Next slide, please. So this slide is a new slide that was added per Commissioner Moyer's question last week, where is community voice in this process? Preschool for All was designed by and for Multnomah County to ensure that the community voice was a part of the technical advisory group's work. Laura Media was hired to lead that engagement process. The process was created in collaboration with Multnomah County Chair's Office, as well as the Preschool and Early Learning Division. This engagement process focused on community priorities that can inform the TAG's future recommendations about the PFA tax. I deeply value Laura Media's equity-focused community engagement and their commitment to honoring what community members shared. Nearly 2,000 community members completed the survey, and 84 group participants shared their insights and recommendations to help Preschool for All grow. While supporting the tax-related work of the TAG was the primary purpose of Laura Media's engagement process, community feedback naturally highlighted opportunities for the program to improve as well. PEL seeks to incorporate the community feedback into the implementation of Preschool for All whenever possible. And to that end, in next month's briefing, PFA briefing, PEL will highlight a few key areas, key Laura Media findings, share what actions were already underway, and what opportunities remain. These findings were presented to the PAG and the TAG 2 weeks ago, the last meeting, and there were lots of questions for PAG and TAG from PAG and TAG members, and so we'll be referring to this report and their findings throughout the process leading up to recommendations. Next slide, please. So these were just wanted to highlight some of the key findings in that report, and that report was also included in your materials last week from the 11/6 briefing as well. So universal preschool as a public good. PFA is a moral, Preschool for All is a moral and economic investment that strengthens families, lowers long-term social costs, and builds community resistance. Equity and inclusion. Culturally specific programs, bilingual access, and outreach to immigrant and underrepresented communities are essential. More trust and transparency. More frequent, transparent communication on enrollment, funding, and program decisions is needed to rebuild public trust. Workforce and quality. Living wages, professional development, and culturally responsive training are vital for quality educator retention and sustainability. And lastly, funding and accountability. Strong public support for progressive taxation exists, but fairness in the tax structure, diversified revenue sources, and transparent fiscal reporting are crucial to sustainability. Next slide, please. Now I'll hand it over to Brittany Bagent.
Thank you, Stephen. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Brittany Bagent. I'm a project director with Echo Northwest, and I'm pleased to be here with you this morning. So just wanted to share that our role in this project is to support staff and support you all and work on this process and iterate this process and do as much deep economic research as we can to get you to some tools so you can have some really good dialogue later into next year. Echo Northwest is an economic research and policy consulting firm. We have a deep bench of economic researchers working on this project, and we're an interdisciplinary firm, but two disciplines we don't have are some political support and facilitation support. So today I'm joined by Christian Gaston, who's been helping us with a lot of the nuance and context of this really complicated topic, as well as Camille Trummer, who's joining us online, who's supporting the facilitation. So we'll hear from both of them today. So thank you again for having us. We can do the next slide. So we decided to break up this project into these two phases in partnership with staff, and phase one is complete. The technical advisory group met over the summer, and Camille supported our work in facilitating 4 different meetings. She created or co-created a modified consensus decision-making process that we are using throughout this work. In order to engage our advisory group members. Our firm provided background economic research to just offer what has been happening in the region, what might inform some of the dialogue moving forward. And then we conducted a retrospective counterfactual indexing analysis. So thinking if Preschool for All would have indexed incomes when it started, what would that have looked like now? How would that have changed revenue? And ultimately decided that our advisory group was split on whether or not to recommend indexing, as you may recall. Some were for, some were against. Ultimately, recognizing we just didn't have enough information. It was a really quick process, and that was really the impetus for building out this program advisory group to have that counterbalance to some of those technical economic questions. And so submitted that memo, but then returned right away and have been meeting consistently since then. So I think I'll pause and invite Camille to share a bit more about the consensus decision-making process, because I think that will help inform and help you see what the group will be doing, especially as we move into phase 2. So Camille, if you can hear us.
Yes, I can hear you just fine. Thanks, Brittany. Can you confirm you can hear me all right?
Yep.
All right, perfect. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Camille Trummer. I use pronouns like she and her. I'm the founder of Interplay. We're a social impact consultancy based in Portland that has partnered with Echo Northwest to support this mission critical work. Like Brittany mentioned, I serve as the facilitator and strategist for the Preschool for All Technical Advisory Group and the Program Advisory Group. I apologize for not being able to join you in person today. So, modified consensus with reservation is a decision-making framework that aims to broaden agreement while recognizing that unanimous support isn't always realistic. It has allowed the TAG and the PAG to move forward even if a few people have concerns, so long as those concerns don't rise to the level of full objection. So instead of a simple yes-no vote, when the consultant team has asked for strategic direction to move the work forward, members can indicate support with reservations, and name those reservations, or a full objection. This lets TAG and PAG members see the full range of comfort and concerns before finalizing any decision within our project scope. TAG and PAG have selected this model because their work is complex. It's also very technical and often very time sensitive. And so they needed a process that encouraged thoughtful dialogue without getting stuck in gridlock. It has kept people at the table, so members with reservations have been able to articulate their concerns, but the group has still been able to move forward if the overall direction is sound, and it has incentivized collaboration. Because reservations must be named, the group has been encouraged through facilitation to refine recommendations together and address gaps before decisions reach you as policymakers. Other decision-making frameworks that were considered were simple majority and fist to 5, but ultimately modified consensus with reservation was selected by both groups and is working as a decision-making framework in critical junction points in our work. Let me know if you have any questions about that. Back to you, Brittany.
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
Who decided that the work of the TAG would be determined by the members versus what the commission wanted to have explored and have their expertise weigh in on?
Is that, Commissioner, is your question related to modified consensus or the scope of work of the TAG?
Well, it's related to decision-making because you just laid out how the TAG chose to internally make decisions, including what issues would be analyzed. And I am asking, who decided that the TAG was going to make those decisions, is my question.
One point of clarification, Commissioner. This modified consensus with reservation decision-making framework is specific to their scope of work. This decision-making framework was not used to decide their scope of work. Do you understand that distinction?
Okay, then I guess my question is who decided their scope of work?
That would be a question for Stephen Herrera. Stephen?
Well, I mentioned in my earlier slide, we articulated the scope and the role of the TAG and the PAG early on while we recruited folks. And to this, we reinforced it and highlighted it. We also, at several different points early in the process, shared information with the board.
Did I write you a 2-page memo with what I hoped would be covered by the TAG?
Yeah.
And did that get incorporated?
So two things here. So I want to make sure that we can get through the full presentation today. And I followed up with your chief of staff after the 11/6 briefing. And my understanding that 2-page or 3-page memo, as it was when I spoke with Reagan, was something that you shared with Reagan, and Reagan said was not, that was
That's
something
not
that she
true.
was working with the preschool and early learning staff. So we can circle back to that, but I followed up immediately after the work session.
Did your response include, thank you, we will not be incorporating this?
No, but again, I checked in, I circled back with Reagan after the last work session, and she told me that was not meant for us.
Well, okay, well, go ahead.
Great, thanks.
Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. All right, so moving into phase 2, where we are right now, we can go to the next slide. So this is a high-level overview of the work that we will be doing, checkmarks signaling, which has been completed. So we expanded on background research that would, there's a lot of curiosities about this program, how it's implemented, what it could be, and we worked really hard to keep the TAG focused on questions that would help inform their work as it relates to tax mechanisms. And so our team conducted research on things such as additional baseline economic conditions in the county, demographics and household distributions, migration patterns, earnings of commuters, and so forth. And I know you have those materials in your packet. We've also heard from Lara Media, as Stephen mentioned, and we'll be incorporating some of their recommendations in the framework that we work on next year. And we also discussed, we put out a call effectively to the TAG for tax mechanisms that they wanted our team to evaluate, and incorporated the board's feedback as well, which we'll get into in a moment. So next steps will be applying those new tax mechanisms, so those curiosities, to baseline conditions. That means what are the revenue streams and expenditures right now, and if we were to adjust those with some different mechanisms, what would that look like? How much revenue would the program, or how much revenue would be collected? What would that impact be to expenditures? And then also evaluating with some sensitivity. So if conditions change, such as the number of 3- and 4-year-olds who live in the county, if economic conditions change, incomes change, what kind of levers could we model so that you all can have a full picture of what these things might look like. And then Camille will be supporting the group in terms of creating recommendations in coordination with the PAG and coming back to you next spring with those. So we can go to the next slide, please. So this is a list of the submitted ideas, the tax mechanisms that the TAG submitted, and then Camille walked through a ranking exercise, which she'll expand on here in a moment. So we asked the TAG what mechanisms they wanted us to evaluate, and also incorporated some feedback from you all. So, and these are in rank order of the mechanisms the TAG is most interested in. Property tax is the first one, which I know came up in the last meeting. It doesn't mean this will advance. I think there's just a lot of curiosity about this. I think that's really all it's signaling. This would be a new tax in the county. Comes with a lot of complications. That's where part of where we'll pull Christian in to understand some of those barriers in creating a whole new property tax. The TAG is also interested in delaying the planned 0.8% increase in 2027, evaluating means testing, so that would be an offset to the program. So if families within certain income thresholds could could help support with some tuition, what that would look like, what it would look like if we increase the 0.8% in 2027, so that would be considered an adjustment to the tax, and credits specifically for, this came from the board, credits for households living outside of the county, working inside of the county, so they're unable to participate in the program, so what would a credit look like for them? And we were scoped to just look at 5 mechanisms, but we know that there's a lot of interest around indexing, and so we'll be evaluating indexing across all of these mechanisms as well.
Which one of these proposals would fully fund the program based on our current projections of our current revenue system, including the increase of the 0.8 in the year 2034 has us in the red? So I'm not seeing an option that would in fact increase revenue to fully fund, which is in fact the language in the code is the purpose of the text. So which one of these does that?
That's a great question. Oh, go
Yeah,
ahead.
so, and I wanted to build on that, because that's what, I mean, this is great to have all these tax mechanisms, and I do think number 4 actually looks at like increasing the tax above it, so that one, but the base, I mean, the underlying and very first item of the tag that's listed even in the document that talks about like the purpose of the tag is about ensuring that there is adequate revenue to fund the program.
Yes.
As we get to universal.
Yes.
So I mean, I don't see these in the slides, but that has to be the kind of underlying concept, even as all of these other tax mechanisms are being explored.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question. So we are we're looking only at mechanisms that would fully fund the program. So it will be a binary yes, no. This will fully fund in 10 years or this will not. And so we're looking at a 10-year threshold and are working with Jeff Renfro on defining what sustainability looks like for the program. But there's also, we're applying these to the existing conditions, as I mentioned, but also looking at things like population change. So in-migration, out-migration. So again, if the number of 3- and 4-year-olds changes, we know birth rates are declining, we could expect some changes to enrollment, and so that will change what the expenditures will be. But the charge of the tag is to make a recommendation on a mechanism that will fully fund the program, continue to fully fund the program.
And just to clarify, I asked for the means testing of co-pays, so that should
okay.
also be board, just because I want to make sure that anyone who's asked for something in here is reflected.
Thank you for that.
And then I really think that the work that's happening now is critical because we have, like you were mentioning, changes in demographics or changes in assumptions or about cost of the program and these other things that all need to be looked at. But I know that I just want to, my question is going back to, or how much are you at all going back to the original work that was done by the Preschool for All task force? Because we looked at property tax, we looked at soda tax, we looked at like a whole bunch of different mechanisms in deciding where we ended up with a higher income earner tax, marginal tax. So I'm just curious about, any of the background that you have for what had been contemplated before.
Yeah, looks like Christian wants to jump in. I'll add quickly first that, and at least on our screen it's cut off, but there's a soda tax that was at the bottom as an example of one that was evaluated in the original group, but so there was interest in the tag to revisit that, and that did not advance, as you can see, as one of the mechanisms we will look into, but we are referencing that work. But go ahead, Christian.
Yeah. Tasia, can you move the words up to the top of the screen for a second? So, yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Can I jump in? Sorry, I've had my hand raised for a little bit. if it's okay.
Commissioner, we can't see you, unfortunately, so Tasia, can you keep an eye on that from, okay, sorry about that.
That's okay. So sorry to just jump in, but so I'm going to go back to the issue I've raised every single time we've had this discussion is around the taxes is before we get to what is sustainable, it's like, what is the program? I really would like to see all the assumptions that are being made about the program when we get to universality, what the timeline is. So, because otherwise, like creating a tax to fund something that we're not even quite sure what the underlying assumptions are, that I would like that shared with the commission as soon as possible, so we know what the assumptions are about the program and how it's going to, and key milestones, so that we can assess the sustainability of the revenue and the actual revenue mechanisms against that. Because I feel like this is like a backwards, like we're talking about the financing plan and we're not even quite sure what it is that is being financed. You know, I've brought up several times the issue with the demographics, or just the implementation, like what is the program? Are we implementing what the voters approved, or is it voter approved plus? So to me, I'm making this request again today, that I feel like we need this information at the front end, not when we get the sort of results of the tax, like the tags work on the tax.
Thank you.
I know that, like, if Jeff Renfro has made, created a set of assumptions, those need to be shared with the commission so that we know what we're basing this work on.
So thank you, Commissioner Brim-Edwards. So I sent your chief of staff yesterday an email that outlined all of PEL, preschool and early learning, replies to the board over the spring and summer. So on April 30th, there was an overview of all the Preschool for All operating expense projections that was sent to the board. Also on April 14th, there was an email that was sent. And again,
I saw that. I'm sorry, I did read the email that you sent before the meeting, but it doesn't answer my questions about what the assumptions are. I'll just use demographics. Every single meeting we've had about this, the demographics that have been built into this, just that they can't be real, because it shows actually no change over, a long horizon, and that's not how demographics work. So again, I'd like to see what specific assumptions are being shared with the tag for their modeling work, so that we can have that same information. Like, are we
So-
building the program that
Commissioner?
only those who meet the income requirements to have the 10 hours, or are we modeling some other model? What's the mix of half day versus whole
Yeah.
day?
Commissioner, I think we have an answer for you.
So, Commissioner, I would say that this is Christian Gaston, for the record, Chair Vega-Peterson Board. Good to see you all. The PAG and the TAG are asking the same questions that you're asking, Commissioner. So this week, we're going to be working through with the TAG some of the initial cost analysis that the county has provided to Echo Northwest. What we're trying to get both groups to is exactly what you're asking for. So what are the big cost drivers? How can you evaluate this program from a budgetary perspective to understand whether you're facing an economic recession and you need to address that through budgetary action, or whether you have tax policy questions, or, Commissioner, as you're stating, whether there are, questions about, how the program should be implemented. All of those questions are happening at the table. I'll also add that the PAG recently had a very...
Which table? I'm sorry, which table?
At both, the PAG and the TAG.
Why would the TAG be discussing important policy issues?
So all of the members
related
are
to the
asking,
program?
all of the members are asking these questions. The
I
process...
really appreciate that. I really appreciate that, Christian. I
So
would ask-
Commissioner, he isn't done. I mean, let's just let him go ahead and finish it.
So I'm hearing you, Commissioner, and I think that what I'm suggesting is we're running through a process. The ECHO team can describe a little bit more how they've taken the assumptions that the program team at the county have built, and they're building multiple models. And the goal is to present to the board a series of websites that you can actually look at the models yourselves and see how various policy changes could affect the revenues and understand how different scenarios of demographic change could affect the demand inside the program. So that's the goal, and we're in process of that work.
Great, I really appreciate that, Christian. It sounds like what it is that I'm looking for. I would just ask that the commission get the information in at the same time, not just have it be, we need to watch the committee meetings in order to receive that information. I would hope that it would be presented to us, like, here's our starting set of assumptions. Here's how we're going to work through them, but it not be an afterthought, or that we need to watch an advisory committee meeting in order to secure that information. Just because it's, I think as we think through this and consider the ways that it's going to be funded, what type of people have access to universal preschool, that it will be important for us to be engaged in the conversation and know the assumptions that are being utilized by the county in order, and provided to advisory committees in order to make make recommendations.
So, Commissioner, this is Camille Chummer. Are you suggesting that you would like a presentation or a briefing from the consulting team following each TAG and PAG meeting? I want to be clear.
Yeah, thank you for the question. My request is that, as assumptions are being provided, well, they've already been provided to Echo Northwest, that we understand what those assumptions are. Again, it's there were a lot of statements.
If I could just jump in, we have 2 more briefings for sure, and I want to say that will absolutely happen. It's something that I've just noted as well, that as our teams keep working on the next sessions, need to be top priority for the next work session that we have. So absolutely, Commissioner, it's on the list.
All right, let's go ahead and continue.
Great. Let's go to the next slide, please. So this is an empty table, just to show you illustratively a framework of what this will look like. So the top line, the current baseline, is exactly what we're talking about here. What are these conditions right now? What are the assumptions going into that? And then we will apply a series of sensitivity tests. So not just mechanisms such as this property tax concept, but a high growth scenario for 3 and 4-year-olds and a low growth scenario for 3 and 4-year-olds. Higher participation rates if, say, federal programs are not as available, or lower participation rates if federal programs increase. And so we can have some of these levers and look at some of these different conditions. Also looking at 6-hour days versus 10-hour days. I know that's been a question as well. And so across the tax mechanisms on the left, we will apply this series of sensitivity tests on the right. At our TAG meeting tomorrow is when we will present our full understanding of the baseline and a few of these sensitivity tests, just to give the TAG a sense of what this will ultimately look like. And as Christian alluded to, there will be a lot of charts. This is a lot of information, a lot of data, really hard for our human brains to really consume. And so we will be creating likely kind of a dashboard website, just as a tool, not as a full project website, but just to be able to look at some of these conditions, turn them on and off, and get a sense of where are the levers, where are we seeing changes to fixed costs versus variable costs, which again, I think will help answer some of these questions. So that's what we're moving toward. So I'll pause here and ask if there's any questions of the approach of the analysis piece.
I have a
Commissioner
question.
Moyer? We'll go to Commissioner Moyer first, and then you, Commissioner Brem-Edwards.
To what degree was the results of the Laura Media survey play into how you guys came to what we're exploring more in depth with your analysis? Because I looked at it, and property tax was one of the least popular options. I believe only 9%
Yeah,
thought that that was a viable option.
Yeah.
And yet, property tax is the number one of the group, which, and there, so I'm not understanding, like, we spent $250,000 on Laura Media. I have some concerns about how the survey questions were written, but we did get feedback, and I'm not seeing it reflected. So I'm wondering, what is its role in this?
a great question. So this might not feel satisfying, but the pace of the projects didn't allow for the engagement piece to fully inform this process. However, it will fully inform the recommendation process. So Camille will be working with the TAG and PAG to build a recommendation framework of that question we talked about a few minutes ago. Is this mechanism sustainable? Yes or no? Is this program equitable, as we are discussing in the advisory group, as the Lara Media work has outlined? Is it responsive to these community concerns? And so I see their work playing a very critical role in the recommendations. We aren't just going to deliver you this full table of data. There will be nuance and narrative and thought behind why the advisory group is recommending this tax mechanism over this tax mechanism. So that's what will be done. What has been done is, one of the recommendations out of Lara Media was to evaluate tax mechanisms and evaluate the funding structure from time to time. So we're doing that, so that that's happening, but that was expected anyways. And so they, again, did come to present to the group and offered a briefing, and were able to answer questions. But as we're building out, how do we turn data and analysis into a recommendation, that's when their work will get much more aligned. Yeah.
Commissioner Brim Edwards, did you still have a question?
I do. And it's about the property tax. Was for the discussion of the TAG, was that as a substitute revenue mechanism, or like an additive to the mechanism that was in the ballot measure?
Commissioner, the property, I would say that the TAG ranking, the property tax, where they ranked it, it was really about curiosity. The question was, could this be part of the mix? What would it look like? There wasn't they haven't had the discussion yet about, are you talking about a district? Are you talking about a levy? And honestly, I think once that conversation occurs, the interest will likely wane. As we know, the Constitution constrains property tax pretty significantly. And this is an option that the TAG definitely wanted to understand what the math was. And from my history working at Multnomah County, we have had value in knowing what we can raise in property taxes for any service that we provide at the county. But I do think that as the analysis moves forward, you'll see the conversation center more on the base tax.
Was it a substitute, or this is just like an additive?
So they didn't discuss that deeply. The question was, what mechanisms do you want math on, essentially? And they said, this is a mechanism we'd like to see the math on, and then we'd like to have that conversation, Commissioner, about how these different tax mechanisms might fit into the overall picture.
So, thank you. I would ask, I would be very reluctant, or it'd be hard for me to be supportive of a property tax because of the impact on housing prices. I would ask that if the TAG is going to look at the property tax, that they take into consideration the impact that is going to have on housing prices, both for renters or just rents, and also just overall the cost of housing, because that just directly flows into just an added cost on housing, and that seems counterintuitive to what we're trying to accomplish right now in terms of more affordable housing and rents. So I hope that would be considered not just as in isolation of funding another program.
Thank you, and they've noted that, so thank you, Commissioner. All right.
All right, if we could get slides back and go to the next slide, please. All right, this is where we are. So we conducted background research, again, to answer questions and curiosities with the tag. We are building out these scenarios, and a scenario will include the combination of a tax mechanism and a sensitivity test and stacking these things. And then our challenge will be to communicate that back to you in a way that feels cohesive. The TAG and the PAG are going to be working more closely together in the coming months, receiving the information at the same time, asking questions at the same time, and having that dialogue, which we think will offer more transparency between the two groups. They'll be looking at these scenarios and then ultimately developing a single set of recommendations. If we can go to the next slide. And I'll invite Christian to share some next steps.
Thanks, Brittany. So as Brittany mentioned, we've had one joint session with the PAG and the TAG where all members were at the table, and this was where Commissioner Moyer, I was mentioning, all of the members are asking the same kinds of questions that the board is asking. They also are very, I would say that most of them have expressed a keen concern about making sure that their recommendations are meaningful to you all. They want the work to be something that you can use to make your decisions, both as you're heading into the next budget and recognizing that there's sort of a deadline for tax changes in the fall and then moving forward. So just a brief overview of the sort of work ahead. In November, the TAG's going to be reviewing the baseline results and discussing sensitivity tests. Brittany had outlined some of that work that will inform those models that we've talked about. And then in December and January, the TAG's going to review essentially the math for the tax policy changes that have been discussed and to talk about scenario results. Then the TAG's going to share those scenario recommendations with the PAG, and the PAG is really going to have the conversation about what are the big budget levers that they would recommend to the board to think about if there are, trade-offs or potential additive effort to be added to the program. And then in March, we're going to synthesize those recommendations and bring them forward to the board.
I would just add, on the other side of this work session, let's work to take this timeline and incorporate where the next board work sessions will be so that we're hitting the mark for what board members are asking for. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Oh, go ahead.
Can I ask a point of clarification? It's my understanding some of these, and I really think I only know about the property tax, but I'm not sure, would have to be referred to voters, correct? At least a property tax would.
The property tax would, and I think Jenny mentioned that last time, the property tax would, changing the rates or those other things like with our existing mechanism would not, and we could still choose to,
Yeah.
but they wouldn't be required.
Okay, thanks.
And I would say that when it comes back into the, when the board gets recommendations, if there are things that we want to pursue from, that standpoint of taking further action on the board, that's another piece of it that we will need to wrap into any, potential action that we would want to take as a board.
And I just wanted Camille Trummer has a hard stop out at 9:55, and I'd love her to see if she can take us through the last slide before she has to leave.
Okay, great.
All right, commissioners, so what you're looking at is a visual interpretation of our work plan, which is complementary to the last slide that you looked at. So this is a snapshot of the work that has been done and the work that is ahead of us. You can see, and I'm sorry that this slide is so small, you've been given PDFs of this work plan. You will continue to get updated PDFs as things are modified. But essentially, we've been working with the TAG in what we're describing as phase 2 since September 10th. And you can see the meeting cadence to the left, starting on 9/10, and then all the way to the right, ending in February on the 18th. Layered into that are the PAG meetings. You can see we started working with them on September 17th. We will work with them through potentially March 4th, depending on how much time they need to process the TAG's recommendations and then fold theirs into them this spring. Layered in between the TAG and the PAG meeting cadence are opportunities for each group to be in collaboration with one another. So, for instance, on November 4th, we had our first joint TAG and PAG meeting because it was very clear to me as a facilitator that they needed time to be in conversation with each other, and that the PAG in particular would benefit from hearing the questions, the complexity, and the nuance being raised during TAG meetings. Moving forward, there are specific milestones in which PAG members are invited to TAG meetings, starting with tomorrow's meeting on the 19th through February 4th. And we will have another joint meeting in February, particularly around final recommendations to make sure that the TAG and the PAG have a cohesive, comprehensive, and complementary recommendation for the board to consider. You can see the bottom line is what I'm describing as board engagement. So since September, Multnomah County staff have provided weekly updates to your teams. We are now at a board briefing in November. There will continue to be weekly updates as well as additional briefings, particularly in alignment with the TAG meeting cadence so that you're up to speed on questions raised, considerations, and curiosities. And then there will be a final briefing between the TAG and the PAG so that you have a chance to digest and ask questions about their final recommendation, as well as, of course, your board deliberation period and final vote. So this is in flux because as we are continuing to get feedback from the TAG and the PAG, they are becoming very clear when they need additional time to be in conversation with each other as TAG and PAG members, but also as a cohesive group. So for instance, the PAG at their last meeting last week indicated that they would like an additional meeting in early December to process the research findings that will be shared tomorrow as well as on the 10th of December. So they will be meeting in early December. So we will share an updated timeline with you as we're getting continued feedback and strategic direction from both groups. Questions?
No, thank you, Camille. I think my comment earlier, I think the blue line for the board is insufficient, so we can update that based on what we think we need and how it fits into the timeline, and then work with Stephen to make sure that's snapped into this image.
Yeah, and we already have some things already on the calendar. I know we're going to probably need to figure out exactly what that iteration is going to look like, but we do have another board briefing on Preschool for All on December 16th. We have tentatively scheduled another work session in January 13th, so we can fill this in. I think the first iteration of us didn't have a board line, and that's something that I wanted to add in so that people would know where we would, so we can add more detail on that. I think the big thing for me is just understanding for this board, if we decide to make any changes to the program, whether it's the tax mechanism or anything else, that we need to have that decision done by August 26th.
So I'm just going to say, I love the slide. I think it's great for the financing, but it's a slide and a timeline and decision-making matrix around a financing plan. And I would like to see what it is that we're financing long-term. Again, I'm just going to go back to what are the program elements? What are the assumptions we're making? How does it play out over multiple years to get to universal preschool? For what timeline? What steps? What assumptions? What's the mix that is going to be offered? Half day, full day, 6 hours, several days a week, full week. What are the assumptions so that we can understand what it is that we're financing? Because we're creating we will be, I think, making decisions about a longer term financing plan, but without knowing what it is that is actually being financed.
So just to kind of give a sense of next steps, because I know that we've talked a couple of times, we've got a December 16th briefing, I think a work session, again, makes sense to do there. And that will include, it should include, I should say, this question about assumptions of the program. And I've got more detailed notes that we can talk about, as well as a bit of the discussion about the path to universality, which is part of going to have some of those assumptions underneath it that Commissioner Brim Edwards is mentioning, as well as what is the ongoing operating cost of universal preschool for all at full implementation. So that is the plan for the 16th, just so that folks know what's coming next.
Thank you, Commissioner. And just to clarify, this, we only have an hour, and I believe it's a briefing.
So we'll figure that out.
Okay.
I mean, honestly, like if we need to do what we did today and extend for another hour, so we could have a full hour of briefing, because that is a lot of information to cover, as well as then an hour for, or whatever, we can talk about that, but don't get too hung up on what we've got.
Okay. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
I have some questions. I'm not really sure who it's directed to, because I don't exactly know how these things were brought together. But what is the economic makeup, as in income, of the members of the TAG? And how representative of taxpayers is that?
We did not ask for that information, so
Can you ask for that information?
I can certainly try.
Okay. What is the conflict of interest policy for consultants or participants in either the PEG or the TAG?
I would say for all advisory groups, right?
Sure,
Universal
sure.
policy.
But what is it?
We've asked all members of the TAG and PAG, the same for all advisories across the county, to identify any potential conflicts of interest or perceived conflicts of interest, and we have those on file for every member.
Is being paid by an organization as either their spokesperson or their consultant that already has a stated position on the tax for preschool for all a conflict of interest?
I'm not sure I can answer that, but I think, so I'm not sure if there, so we talked about this before in great detail. Brittany, would you like to kind of share some insight into that?
Sure. So our immediate past president is on the TAG. He was invited to join the TAG in his personal capacity prior to our firm submitting our application or being awarded the contract in a competitive process. He spends, I believe, 5 hours a week on projects related to our firm. He's spending most of his time in other capacities. And the work I believe you're referring to was for his work from a different organization. And he was, similar to my role on this project, was facilitating a process. So was not, he was staffing a group that.
Did he give interviews in the media in which he personally talked about how damaging this tax structure was?
So,
This is relevant.
no, I want one, okay, so a couple things. Like, I think determinations of someone has a real or perceived conflict of interest is a legal question, right? And that's something that should be answered by the attorneys.
Which I brought up repeatedly over months and have not gotten an answer to. So I do think this is incredibly relevant.
So we can look at that for using the forms and the information that have
But
been
you
submitted
haven't.
for people. And I also know that there are people on both sides of the issue around tax policy for preschool for all who are being paid by organizations who have taken stances on the
Maybe
preschool
they
for all.
shouldn't have been on this.
But the point of the TAG, from my perspective, is that we have a diversity of opinions and perspectives to actually analyze the totality and the complexity of the questions around this program and being able to advise considering all perspectives. And so I think that the transparency that we have now with conflict of interest forms are a really important step in that direction. And I think that just like when I was in the legislature, right, you had to declare a conflict of interest. I think that if there's any questions of whether somebody actually does have one, we can get that answered and be very transparent about it.
Then why hasn't it been answered when I brought these issues up in August? I mean, I don't want to hear I can, we should have, like, fundamentally, there are people who are on this advisory board, I don't care what side they are on, who are paid to push an agenda. That is problematic to the credibility. I can't look at what they're recommending we study and not feel a pretty strong sense of, oh, I wonder where that came from. Not paying it for 3 years, where did that come from?
So I appreciate that. I will follow up with Stephen to find out like exactly what has been done with all of those and have they been looked at and declared whether they're conflict, because I'm curious about that too. But we do have that information to do that work from.
And it wasn't disqualifying.
No, there wasn't it was not disqualifying
Why?
because that wasn't a condition of somebody being on the tag.
That they are paid to have a position on our tax policy was not a condition that would have disqualified someone for participating in advising the board.
I don't know that I don't know if anyone would characterize that they are paid to have a position on something as an accurate characterization of anybody who's currently on the tag. But so we can continue this. I do just want to say it's after 10. We have 2 more briefings, and so we will follow up with this. I know that this is an issue for you. I know that this is, but again, like I think the transparency that we have and the diversity of opinions is going to be helpful for
Well, I
us.
don't think we've had transparency at all.
Okay, so are there any other questions aside from this so that, because we do have to move on to the HRAP conversation next? Okay, so we'll follow up. We will provide more detail about what is going to be in the board briefing on the 16th. We'll look at the schedule to also have time for discussion and work session around that. And then we will update some of the slides with more detailed board engagement during the timeline. And we've taken the asks for different commissioners during this meeting, and I know folks have been keeping track of that, and we'll follow up with those either in this next meeting or in subsequent meetings, or following up with some materials that people have asked for that the PAG of the tag may be receiving. Okay, thank you to Eco Northwest for coming back. Thank you, Stephen, for moving this work forward, and thanks to all the PAG and tag members for their commitment to working on this issue over the next several months. All right. Our next briefing is, our next work session is actually going to be on the homeless response systems, the updated action plan, and the key performance indicators. It'll be a work session on that. So I'm going to invite Jillian Shoney down.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
For the record, Jillian Shoney, Director of the Homelessness Response System, and I do not have a presentation. So this time was just specifically carved out to provide y'all additional space to discuss anything you want to discuss post-joint work session that happened with the city last Thursday. I will just name one thing that I appreciated. The questions about the plan and how they relate to the KPIs, where the work happens, as well as the interest in the overall approach to goal setting. And I sent a follow-up memo last night that y'all probably haven't had a chance to read, but it is in your inbox to sort of address those 2 themes that came out of our time together last Thursday. And then the only other thing that I'll add is I appreciated the focus on housing production. I'm not sure we've had that level of discussion on housing production yet, and sort of understanding where the city is going next, beyond sort of redoing its needs analysis and then all of the various housing production strategies. But you know, at the end of the day, they're still identifying sort of new financial mechanisms or new sources of money to do that. So with that, I am here to answer your questions.
Jillian, can I start by just saying, did you send I'm not saying anything in my inbox, did you send that to our district inboxes or to us personally?
To you personally. I'll double check it right now, Commissioner, though.
I'm not saying it, I would appreciate getting it to the top of my,
Did it come into y'all? That's so weird. Thanks for flagging that, because last week there were a couple electeds that didn't get the lead up to the work session, so I will figure out what's going on.
Yeah, it looks like you BCC'd everybody, so we can't see exactly who it went to,
Yeah.
but you might be able to see.
But while I'm looking for that, I'm happy to take additional questions, or y'all can launch into discussion.
I think, one thing I do think is critical is we continue to hold at the 0 to 30. And I think the last time around housing production, one of the questions I had been asking about families in particular, because we tend to not build a lot of 0 to 30 family-sized units, is what their income level is. And I think what I've heard is max is like 40% or so. So I think it's really critical that we also are attending to the unit size and type, which I know doesn't always happen when we think about homelessness and housing production. Folks tend to think about SROs or smaller studio units, but we're kind of missing the mark on our families. So that's just something I want to make sure we keep in that conversation.
I continue to want to see us break out our strategies by type of population, because it's really hard. I have a hard time when I read this, visualizing, like, are we addressing the circumstances of families through all of this? Are we addressing the circumstances of seniors all through this, youth experiencing homelessness all through this? And it's really hard to see if there are holes and gaps if we're not breaking out by population and being able to kind of see the comprehensive strategy. I also feel that a little bit for the goals, because I do think they look different. Some people, like, our goal is permanent supported housing, right level of support. That is the end goal. Like, that is a great outcome for some people, where others, I think there's questions of, like, did we do enough of jobs, access to meaningful economic, improvement of one's circumstances by, we got them in apprenticeships, we've got whatever it is. And that's really hard to see. I don't know if that's a possibility to do, but I'm having a hard time evaluating, because I'm not even necessarily sure what groups fall into some of these. And then my second is, I see a lot of, like, create work group, map, articulate, explore, report, explore, identify, determine, develop. And I get those are action items, but, like,
Yeah.
where's the doing? Like, I don't see corresponding ones of, like, determine and then implement, or I'm a little bit unclear, one, who's determining, and then what happens after we map, determine, identify.
Okay, I'm going to start with your first one. Know that all of our key performance indicators can be broken down by the system, racial demographics, gender, disability, veteran status. So when we do a quarterly report, we can break that down in that way, where then with HSD in particular, like, we can see where there is a problem and figure out what to do about it. We had an example of that last year where we changed some contracts to hopefully make a difference. So that is just one example. But I think if we see something in the data, it could mean a new action item. It doesn't necessarily mean it pertains to the existing set of action items. it can be something about a current program that actually isn't even part of the action plan, because what the action plan does is just name the work that we know we need to do now. We want to look at all of these things, but new things can arise via the data analysis every quarter. That was the first part.
And sorry, Jillian, just to
please.
clarify, when you're saying system, you mean population, right? System is youth, domestic violence, adults,
Yes,
family.
sorry, yeah, our 4 systems. And I say 5 because I add veterans to that, but anyway, yeah.
I might consider a 6th, which I think are individual. Yeah, or
Yeah.
age and/or disability, where the goal may not be employment, or,
So one other thing, and this I think is something we have to work on, because we kept saying chronic homelessness and we say it a lot, but we don't ever define it. And I think there was some comments made during the meeting last Thursday that seemed to imply that folks with chronic homelessness don't have disabilities, and that is incorrect. So anybody who is in that chronically homeless group is somebody who also has
Yeah.
a disabling condition, and generally, I will tell you that it is co-occurring, if not trimorbidity. So I did want to clarify that, because I forgot that came up and was like, whoa, that's not accurate.
Yeah, that when that was brought up in the meeting, I was like, oh, that's not correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the Pop A definition, we can be more clear about.
And I want to say, I think that there, a lot of those folks do and will get into PSH, and I think that we have to look at opportunities for them to also, right, healing does happen, for folks to actually access some type of employment or some type of other work that doesn't unfortunately put them on the entitlement benefits cliff, where then they lose entitlement benefits. But I just wanted to acknowledge that some of that can also happen, and I think does.
Yeah. And I do think, I mean, I think the senior population, to Jillian's point that we can add action items, I think that we also have to be looking at the data, really, and like using the data to help guide us. Because what we did see is an increase in seniors who are experiencing homelessness. We saw in the point in time count an increased number of the folks from the Latina population who are experiencing homelessness. Maybe not, and so I just think that like some of this that's part of this, is that we're building a system that needs to be responsive as well. I think that if there are certain strategies that like we fund employment programs, we fund investment in workforce, because we believe that that is part of somebody's ability of moving through our system, of becoming stable, of helping them stay in housing, but also just providing a lot. But I think to your point, but that's not necessarily going to be the path for everyone. So how do we acknowledge that? How do we have a strategy around that, that piece as well? And I think what I'm hearing from you, Jillian, is like that those types of things can be done with as strategies within the department levels, within the programs, within the investments that this board makes in programs. Do you have a suggestion on how we capture that with the data that we have? And maybe that's a question for Lori to come back
On
to.
workforce specifically?
No, on like identifying populations for whom workforce or a permanent job may not be actually a long-term option.
Ooh, well, oh my God, multiple data sets probably. The high acuity behavioral health data set probably tells us a lot at an individual level. And one of the next steps with that is actually to look at everybody who's currently in PSH and understanding what's happening with them. There's probably the Pathways project that's happening. I will resend that around, but it was sort of 400 interviews of people who experienced our system, different types of experience, and then sort of going deep on 50 people to pull in that quantitative piece of it. And I think we'll learn a lot. I'm hoping we'll learn a lot from that.
Yeah, great, thank you. I just wanted to make sure, there are ways that we can look at the data. Okay.
I want to be careful, because one, I have a lot of problems with predictive data. And I have absolutely worked with folks that if you met them, when I first met them on the street, you would make a lot of assumptions about what they could and couldn't do and what their future would look like. And once they were housed and had some supports, things looked really different. And so I appreciate, I do want us to have a level of detail that helps us know how to target resources, but I want us to be careful about making too many assumptions about the source of data that we have and how that is predictive or not of somebody's ability.
Yeah.
So I have a question. So we have this document, so since there was nothing posted, which is unfortunate because I think it makes it hard for the public if anybody's trying to follow our conversation of what it is we're actually discussing. But I have a document that's the KPI definitions and recommendations. And I just want to sort of center what you're going to be asking the board. In that document, there is sort of color-coded different items, and like recommendation, indicate positive direction, reduce net homelessness over 2 years, increase number of units affordable to households with extremely low incomes per 100 households with ELI. Is that what you're going to come back and ask? And I'm not sure if this is a question for the chair or that you're asking us to approve.
Essentially what's in yellow. So let me back up. Our current 4 KPIs expire at the end of this calendar year via contract. They are codified, if you will, in Exhibit 1 that is attached to the IGA. We need to replace Exhibit 1 with new and better, more comprehensive KPIs, and that is what is in yellow, sort of the what we are measuring.
Okay, so first of all, I would ask that just with meeting materials, we actually post the document. When I look through here, there's actually, it looks like just four sentences, because some of the ones in yellow says, set no goal, uses a system indicator. So when I look at these, just my feedback is, I think they're so high level to be meaningless in some ways because, indicate positive direction, reduce net homelessness over 2 years. Like we could move from 16,000 to 15,000, 950 and say we have a positive direction. And so, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's just, I think it'll be relatively meaningless in terms of what is our actual goal. So when I look at this document, it's the sort of step down that's much more important. That's our SMART goals about what we really want to do. And my understanding is that was something that is not going to be set by the commissions, which I really think they should, for the pieces that we have accountability and responsibility. So when I look at these, it's kind of like, of course we want to have a net reduction, but to me that's not really a KPI because you could have a very small change and not actually have moved the dial. Same thing on let's see, another one is just within 2 years, reduce the share of people who are known to be unsheltered. To me, that's not very aggressive and it's not very specific. It's like, of course we want to do that, but to me, this isn't like a KPI that we can arrange our work around. So I'm concerned that then if we also are being asked to approve the Homeless Response Action Plan, that it's a series of activities without some very specific outcomes. So that would be my concern. And I would hope that maybe after this meeting, we could have sent to us exactly what it is that you're, now that we have the larger context, exactly what it is that you're asking the commission to approve, because I think that's what we should be reacting to.
Yeah, Commissioner, I will write, I haven't done it yet, sort of the new Exhibit 1, which will just be the what we are measuring. That will be, you will get to vote up or down on that. But your comments, you're blending what we are measuring with goal setting. And we are not choosing specific goals right now because it would be irresponsible given how the financial floor is shifting underneath us in real time. I mean, I could do it. We could choose goals, but we decided to add a phase 3 because of what we learned since May when we started this engagement process. I'm being iterative for a fiscally responsible reason.
Yeah,
Things are going to be continuously shifting. I'd like to respond to that. Things are going to be continuously shifting both at the federal level, the local level, but I believe as long as we have, more than $100 million a year from taxpayers, we should be like, we can have a range of goals, but to me, again, there's nothing wrong with them, but I just think they are somewhat meaningless in terms of like, are we meeting our, the objectives and are we getting results that we want?
So my understanding of this is, this ask is to let HRS know these are the things we want to be measuring, and then to come back as part of our budget process is where we start to get specific, our and the cities, on specific goals, right? I could say right now, reduce net homelessness by 70%. I could say that, and I want that as a goal. That would be amazing, but the part that's missing is how are we investing our dollars to be able to achieve that goal? And so I think, Jillian, it might be helpful to understand kind of, it's not just the SOC that's going to talk about this, but how you're envisioning the board and the city council getting to more specificity, because the third phase, as you've kind of called it, is the actual goal setting, where there will be another vote or there won't be another vote. That I think may help.
I'll use this practical example. If I have these in place, and well, I'm just going to put, this is not just about HSD, it is about other county departments in the city, but just to use that as an example, if I have this in hand, it becomes a tool where I can discuss with any given department or the city of Portland how their decisions are going to influence the direction of any given KPI. So when HSD and the other county departments issue their requested budgets to y'all on February 6th, we now will, if this is approved, we will have a way to look at what they've put on the table to y'all, and I can say, oh, this is going to influence this one this way or that way. Without these, I don't have that tool, and neither does the HSD data team, budget folks, finance folks. Like, we have to agree on what we are measuring so we can have those dialogues throughout the budget process. You're going to know, this board in particular is going to set the foundation, set the direction for what the SOC does in July of 2026.
So I'm going to go back to just the steering and oversight committee, that it was not set up to be a substitute for the county commission's policy or budget making process. We were very clear throughout the process on both sides, with the city and the county. I think the process that was described, it seems backwards. It seems like we should be saying, what are we trying to accomplish? And then how do we align the resources behind that to accomplish those objectives, versus here's the activity we're going to do, and then here's the outcomes that we're going to get from that, which seems...
Commissioner, you can have that discussion right now. Like, go for it.
Well, I'm just saying, it's...
Like, what do you think goal 1 should be? Like, you can say that right now. You can say it right now. You can say it in one-on-one meetings with me. You can use because this was the original vision of how the SOC worked. You can have communications with the 2 members that are on it. You can have communications with the city folks who are on it, or any of the members, to weigh in that way. That in and out communications is what was envisioned with the SOC in the first place.
Yeah, but that's different than having a vote.
They are a recommending body, right? So they have recommended to you right now what we are measuring. You have your vote on December 4th in this body to say yay or nay.
Okay.
Okay.
And in
what
the
I'm-
meantime, to say, this is what I think
Yeah.
is missing, or I would take this one out because it doesn't, so that's the piece that you're saying is now and all the lead up.
And leading into July of 2026, after the fiscal year 27 budget decisions have been known, you can pick up, you can call the chair and Commissioner Singleton and say, hey, based on what we just decided, I think a bold but not disconnected from reality goal would be X. They can bring that into the SOC space.
So but that's not where the decision-making process is happening. I'm a county commissioner. All of us who aren't on the SOC need to be part of that. So I'm not making recommendations or requesting something from a body that is not a decision-making body. And so back to your point, like you could recommend something right now. So I think what we should have brought forward to us is not just this very, very high level, but here's how the goal-setting process is going to happen for each one of these, except, there's some that you say, there's no goal. But I do think we should click down, and again, it's too bad we don't have the document posted.
They are all posted now.
Okay, they are posted now. Okay, so to have both the yellow but also the green, so we can have a discussion about that. So that would be my very specific feedback, that we not be, let's say, I think the portions that are in yellow are so general that they're not useful for budgetary or setting policy. So I would recommend that we also marry it with the green, which is more of the smart goals. And I don't think the SOC should be, in my other specific feedback, I don't think the SOC should be setting that. Again, at the very beginning, we said about the SOC, it's not a substitute for the county commission or the city council's policymaking or budgetary decision process. And because, again.
So I assume it would work just like it did last time with the community sheltering strategy. I'm unclear on why this is suddenly different than what happened with the first iteration of the SOC and the plan.
So,
I don't think it
Commissioner
is.
Singleton, I appreciate that, your question, because I had some very serious concerns when initially the whole IGA was basically delivered to the county commission with here it is, it's an up or down, you can't change it because this, the city has already approved it. And it turns out the city then made a whole host of changes in the process. So this isn't a new concern that I'm raising.
So Commissioner, we did actually have changes that were made by this board for the IGA that went over to the city, and then they made changes and it came back here. Like that's part of the process, which I think would be probably very similar to what we'll see when these things go to the boards for approval, either now in December or in July when we get more of the specific goals. I think that the really important
I will
piece
say
here,
this,
I think the really important piece here, though, is that there was a recommendation from staff and a conversation at the SOC level to focus right now on the yellow pieces because what was needed to reach certain goals is not understood at this point because of the different financial pieces. But the way that I see it working is like the decisions that the elected bodies are making in terms of budgets is actually going to dictate what the SOC actually sets. It is going to be the decisions of the elected body and how how all of us are choosing to invest our resources that are actually going to determine the SOC's actions, not the other way around.
But that's not what the document says. And again, I don't have there's specific issues with what's in yellow, but I feel like I feel like the most important piece of this of the document is the very specific SMART goals. And how I'm reading it, it says SOC sets the number goal, or SOC sets the goal, and it doesn't say informed by the the county and the city's budget process.
Commissioner, I have said that repeatedly. If I need to
I'm saying the
amend this
document doesn't
document
say
and put
that.
it right at top, I will do so. That's easy. It's not a
The
problem.
document doesn't say that, and so I feel like that, it's unclear, or actually it leaves the impression that the SOC is going to set the goal. And again, I think that is, we were very clear during the initial process. And I will say, I did get the original IGA from the, at the time, the COO for the county, Serena Cruz, who said, this is not to be changed because the city doesn't want to make changes. And yes, Chair, that we did make some small changes, but only after the city
about to say that.
added a whole host of individuals to the SOC.
Okay, so I appreciate that that was your experience then, and that was frustrating to you, and I get that. We are very much taking a lot of time, both in joint meetings and in our own meetings, to talk about this process and what it looks like going forward, and the way that this board will have many opportunities, has had and is having many opportunities to both be informed and make decisions around some of the goals of the system, because we know it's important to everyone. Like, this is basically, I think, I've heard most people's number one priority in terms of the things that we want to be able to change in what's happening in our community right now. If it is helpful to update some of the language in here to be more clear, Jillian has said that she is willing to do that. But for what we have to do in December, it is trying to get to a place where people feel supportive of what is, of the takeaways from the action plan, and then the HRS KPIs, the parts in yellow. And so if there are things that are specific, and I'm hearing you that SMART goals are better. I think we can all agree to that. Again, though, the time to do those is when we actually have a better idea of what resources we will have to inform those goals, and we don't have those yet.
Okay, so my very specific feedback is the green language needs to change to actually indicate what it is that you're saying here versus what is written on the piece of paper, which is SOC setting the goals. And if there's it needs to have that be very, from my perspective, it needs to have very explicit what the county commission's role would be in that, and that they're coming back for, again, because the SOC doesn't have any actual decision-making power, that those then, everything needs to come back to the board. And then I'll just repeat the recommendation I had about the homeless response action plan is that there are a whole host of, this is the second document, there's a whole host of action items that either says the status is underway or a point in time, but then there's, I think, almost the majority of items, or maybe not the majority, but a lot of the items that have no status, so it's not clear when they're going to be done. So to add in some more specifics, like when would we be doing that? Is that this year or 3 years from now?
I can certainly add in start dates, Commissioner, based on the current capacity of my team. That's not hard.
I have a different issue. It's not an issue, it's kind of a question around, should we, some of these are pretty numerical, increase the number of affordable units for extremely low income. I think that's something
Yep.
measurable in our control. I'm a little concerned about reduced net homelessness over 2 years because we don't control all the levers that create people's homelessness. So I did kind of wonder if maybe that's not the right way to phrase it. I am nervous about the direction of our economy and how taxed working people are. And I'm not sure if we nailed everything and hit it out of the park, if those things continue, that we would be able to show positive results there. And so I'm wondering if that's the right way to look at that. I mean, I get the public wants us to reduce homelessness. I want to reduce homelessness.
Yeah.
But I view this as like our city-county compact. And I don't know how we do that necessarily when we don't control the front door. And I don't want, and I don't think we would do this, I don't want the result to be, well, then we make the front door harder to count to drop a number. I don't think we would do that. But I don't know how we have the ability to necessarily do that. So I mentioned that as like potentially out of our control.
Yep.
And I would like our goals to be things that are in our control. I also understand the public wants us to reduce homelessness. I want to reduce homelessness.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people don't know that we are successfully housing 1,100 people a month, except for the fact that 1,400 people are new to experiencing houselessness. And that makes it look like it's getting worse, because in numerical numbers, it is getting worse. Mm-hmm. But I don't think people get 1,100 a month by 12 months, by year after year, is a tremendous effort that I thank the public for investing in. That made a difference to those 1,100 people every single month. And I think we need to talk about that more. But then on the flip side, oh man, 1,400 new people a month, that just guts me. So that's one. I do like things like calling out, we need more units of affordable housing at that 0 to 30. I really like how clear that is, and that works for me to feel like, okay, we're joint committing that that's an area of focus. So I thought that was clear and achievable. I also liked the one about trying to reduce the exits from permanent supported housing for a very high acuity. I think that's a tangible, measurable thing. And you know how I feel about some partners that need to step up and open some doors they've currently shut, state of Oregon. Again, the net reduction in the by names list over 2 years, I get a little nervous about, because I would not want us to pull back from identifying as many people as possible, because I think it's actually quite helpful for us as things may change. And I want us to still even if we cannot serve everyone, know the totality of the issue. So that one makes me a little nervous, because again, I don't think we control that so much. But so the ones that I feel like are giving us a general, we want to focus on this, I really like, because I do kind of feel like that's one of the areas I'd like to get on the same page with the city about, is where are we, dialing in and gonna put some effort toward. Again, I understand we're at a high level because both of us have budget situations that are not totally clear yet, and probably not great. So I tend to, I think it's said under the options, I get a little nervous about the ratios unless we control both factors.
Yes, and we learned that with our first set of KPIs, right?
Yeah,
The placement out of shelter was wrong, it was done as a ratio, and that learnings from that were incorporated. It's why some are hard numbers and some are ratios, because from a data perspective, it makes sense that way, but we can dive deeper on that if you like. I also, Commissioner, I just appreciate that you're naming our collective heartburn and anxiety around the headwinds. And so I think in the context, what I would say in response to that is there's no way around goal number one. to your point of what the community expects from us. So that sort of bold, yet not divorced from reality, where the inputs, right, the data endpoints for one are that inflow, those headwinds, much of which we don't control. And if we don't make that goal, we have to unpackage it and say, and here's why. The headwinds were blowing a whole hell of a lot stronger.
Yeah.
Well, and I just want to add, I think just to share some of the conversation here was, there was such a focus on unsheltered homelessness that there wasn't an acknowledgement that folks in shelter are still homeless and need an intervention that results in housing. And so trying to find that right balance of, we don't want to just be focused on shelter, we have to actually think about that resolution to homelessness. The other that I'll say is that some of the work with the by name list has specific things that are a part of that. And so some of that I think is reflected here, like you want to reduce over time. It's a part of being a part of that cohort of doing that work with the by name list. And just to remind us all, the goal of that is that homelessness becomes rare, brief, and non-recurring. And so a lot of what you see in here is those high-level goals fit into those categories with an attempt to make sure that there's something for each. And the non-recurring, like the folks falling back out into homelessness. And so there's, just to kind of set that context, which I shared with you, I think was missed a little bit of this, some of these are leaning into national best practice and the work that we're doing kind of more broadly that isn't just about partnership with the city. And so I think that's a good question of a lot of what HRAP is really actually a lot of county services. And so there's things being measured here that don't have a ton to do with our overlap with the city of Portland. But that feels like a whole different topic of conversation that probably warrants a discussion.
Well, that was a huge miss in our first set of KPIs. 0 on housing production, unacceptable.
Yeah. And I, just to like kind of piggyback off of that, because I think that is such a key piece of like the role of housing, and we've gone to it again and again. You know, we've had conversations around the SOC table around what are some of the, like, these are very high level things, so what are the specific things the mayor has indicated, like he wants to look at like the length of stay in shelter, for instance. For me, I feel very strongly like we can't have that conversation and just look at certain data points without also talking about housing, because, you know, potentially the reason people are staying in shelter longer is that there isn't enough placements to get people there, or there aren't enough resources in terms of rental assistance or in terms of housing placement dollars to help folks with those things. So I think like all of this is in context, and that's why the pieces around like what we control and what others control, but how they fit together is going to be key to any kind of conversation we have around these things.
We would run out of housing units if we were to our current measure 3. If y'all had a magical pot of money to meet that goal by December 31st, we would run out of housing units.
Yeah.
One thing that, again, I don't know if it belongs here, but I don't know where it belongs, but I want it to be a conversation. I think we're kind of at a point where we're switching from absolute emergency response, where thank you voters of the metro area for saying, yes, we're willing to tax ourselves for this, and we had to like go. And now I think it's time to be like, okay, now we're in the long haul phase, and we're looking at everything we learned, which is totally where we should be and what we should be doing. Some of the things here that I'd love to like see, maybe it's in the plan, I'm not sure, but long term, what is the right balance for how we do rental support? Because I get very nervous on a long-term strategy of market rate rental support. I think it lets us serve less people. It makes it difficult for people as they are becoming employed or greater employed to take over that lease or be able to afford it longer term. And so I have thought, you know, the city is talking about social housing. You know, I think we all often are looking at, do we own something? Do we not? And I don't see that body of work anywhere of like, for the long term, what is the right mix of, or model, maybe it's not mix, maybe it's a model or models of housing, allow us to serve the maximum number of people, balancing that with appropriate type of housing and sustainability for the family. So I just throw that out there.
And some of that, I think, because Josh's piece was so small during our joint session, but are you all going to spend time unpacking more of that rent burden? Because that's where some of that data starts to live, right? And I think there's a combination of, I don't know, actually it would be a really interesting data point. I don't know how much eviction prevention we do that's already in rent-regulated housing, one. Primarily with rapid rehousing dollars, that's where the sustained household question when we were doing the HSD Bud Mod kept coming up for me, and I think we have a lot more to do to unpack that concept and how long people actually need rent assistance, but what the plan is, right? I think there's just, and I will acknowledge, often I used it as a bridge because people were coming up on permanent supportive housing list and I could attach their voucher. So I know rapid rehousing is used in different ways, and I think it's critical that we keep it as flexible as possible. But there is a length of assistance question, and then people's long-term retention post, right? Because retention is measured post-subsidy. And I think, again, that's something that we don't often say when we're presenting information, and it's really important because saying somebody's retaining housing while I'm still paying their rent, of course they are, right? But what happens for them when their subsidy ends is a different question.
Yeah, let's ask HSD to do some work on this because like in rapid rehousing, for example, the average subsidy lasts 6 months, but we do track retention at 6, 12, and 24. So let's dig deeper on that. I will also say I was going to ask Josh Roper to just share all of the data that PHB does track, and that is sub-indicators, if you will, to understand exactly what they're looking at in terms of if any of those data points are the rent burden piece or not. I honestly can't remember. And then I also do not think it's as simple as saying, like, don't use market rate housing because it depends on where you're at in the city. East Portland, naturally affordable occurring housing is there. It's why inclusionary housing didn't extend out that way, right? There are, I would say, probably 60 to 80% AMI units out there that are unregulated. So it isn't just looking at the regulated, it's all of the above.
The one thing I will say about the data from PHB is, and I'm happy to have this conversation offline, I wasn't clear on why we were using such old data when we have a 2025 State of Housing report that shows the current state of rent burden and some of those other data points. So I'd love to understand, because I'm worried that using data up to 2021 is not
What was the source?
going to get, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Is there and maybe it's your body, or maybe it's with the city. I have wondered where policy decisions are coming. Like, I don't see that reflected, and I'm not saying that we can drastically change the state of housing with policy options, but I do wonder if there is a package of policy options that our experts think would be helpful. I guess, I didn't see that.
Yeah, and I think that came up during part of the joint session where Councilor Avalos spoke in response and needing to sort of unpackage the unified housing strategy, and other than social housing, what are the additional pieces? What you see in the plan are sort of the pieces of the current housing production strategy of the cities that is on the books those definitely are happening, and those are pieces of that, but it's certainly not comprehensive. It's one of my follow-ups to just say, hey, can you help us unpackage this a little bit more based on a lot of the questions last week, to be more clear.
Am I final? No, it's probably not. I'm not sure, maybe it is included, but not called out in the response plan. I'm really interested, particularly with the change in the priorities of the federal government, where recovery housing fits, both during treatment, but actually an appropriate time period after treatment. It doesn't have to just be the behavioral health system, but I'm thinking about the people who are engaging in the behavioral health system and are also experiencing homelessness at the same time. I want to just bring that up because I think that there are some conversations around what that should and could look like, and what our national best practices around recovery housing. And I just didn't see that, but it doesn't mean it's not there. It might be said in a way I didn't pick up.
That's okay. There is an action item that sort of refers to what we presumed was coming from the feds in the context of the COC NOFO. So that group is now underway, and all of that is, Chair, do you want to speak to this, is coming to, you're going to be talking about that soon.
So coming soon. So that's actually something that the board, we have to approve the application to the COC for those, to the federal government for the COC funds that are coming there. So there are conversations that are happening at staff levels, at the provider level who are receiving about how do we respond and how do we put this application together for those funds based on what we have traditionally done, on this and on the new guidance from the federal government and how those dollars are going to be allocated. So we're scheduling a work session or a briefing for the board December 16th. And then I know it is going to be a busy day. That's why I'm like, we might have to make it longer.
Ideas.
And yes. And so that we're going to have a discussion on the, no, I'm sorry. We're going to actually have the discussion prior to the 16th because I think we're voting on the 16th. Sorry. We are, so yes, we have this, we're having the conversation about it on the 16th with the board, and then we're going to be voting on the actual application to that on January 8th. So more to come around that. But yes, that is something that obviously we're, a lot of people are working on right now, and how do we respond to this incredibly abrupt and, not just abrupt, but just a huge turnaround from the federal government and how they're allocating funds and what they're prioritizing.
Well, and how we're going to not have a massive inflow into homelessness for all the folks who are on existing vouchers.
And this ties back to the Cape, sorry to interrupt you, like $25 million is at risk.
Yeah.
That's a huge chunk of change.
Yep.
Sorry, Commissioner.
So I lost my train of thought in the
Sorry.
sea of despair that we have just been wallowing in.
So I have a specific suggestion that I'd mentioned also the other day at our joint city-county meeting around the housing production, is just to add in some action items, because the very first one of the housing production has completed the initial plan for the city's unified housing strategy by December 2025. To add the implementation of it, we can have a plan, but if it's not implemented, and I would love to have embedded in this plan some expectations for the city of Portland around housing production, because we can do all these other actions, but if there's not an increase in housing units, then we'll either get stuck in shelter or on the streets. The second piece is, I know that on the SOC we have I believe that the Gresham mayor is on here, and this more broader question is, for example, just on the housing production, do we have also expectations of this as the city, I think the implications of the city of Portland, but also housing production for Gresham, the other cities in the county, and also in the unincorporated areas of, so there's a question, and I think we should add it, but I would like to have some accountability added in on what our expectations are from the city of Portland on their housing goals. And another question I have is, we received the white paper on engaged social housing, sustainable models for housing, clinical services, and supportive housing. And were recommendations from that incorporated into the action plan?
Yeah, those action items exist. There's a work group that's been underway for several months now. They're designing a pilot, and it ties directly to the behavioral health KPI.
And I would add that I don't completely agree with that white paper. I think that it doesn't do service to what Fidelity Housing First model actually is and the research that exists behind that model. I think the question we should be asking is, which I've asked a couple of times now, is what is the types of services and in each of our PSH programs, so that we understand, do we need to do something different to come to Fidelity, or do we need to, we don't bill Medicaid like most programs do. So I'm not saying that we don't need to do transitional recovery housing. I think it is absolutely an effective model, but it doesn't mean that PSH is not effective, and I've had this conversation with Andy as well. So I think it's a both and I don't think it's appropriate for us to lean into entirely a white paper by an organization that is probably the top provider of that type of housing. We can use it to inform, but I am not comfortable using it to set a bunch of specific goals in lieu of some of our PSH work.
And so our work
Thanks,
is very
Commissioner
focused on the slice of the population where we think we can make a difference for. But no one should read that paper and think that writ large PSH is not working, because that is not true.
And then
Yeah, and my question was mainly around how is it informing the work, not directing that, saying it should. I just wanted to know, because obviously it was submitted with a lot of our partners' support.
And I'm sorry, your first thing, Commissioner, do you mind? You're right. We should have in here an action item on the regional housing planning work that Metro is carrying out. They have a hearing this week, in fact. And so we'll nail that down and name that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out, so Home Forward works throughout all of Multnomah County for a lot of the housing placement and assistance and development. And we're in, and so Ivory Matthews, who's the director of Home Forward, sits on the SOC. But I think that's where we can and should be capturing what is the outlook on that. I will say, as Ivory has shared in several of the SOC meetings, their current status and their current requirements, because of changes from the federal, is also looking pretty dire right now. And so, we're in conversations about that. That's going to inform, again, what we're actually going to be able to accomplish long-term based on all of the, totality of the resources that are coming in here and where those resources are being directed.
So I'm just going to be a little fine point on the number 3 of the Housing Response Action Plan. This is very much like complete the plan, share the plan, report the findings and recommendations from the plan. But I would love to have very specific, like, what are the implementation plans built into here? And then just like we're expected to regularly report on whether people are moving to shelter or moving to shelter to housing, but regularly report on how they're doing in terms of increasing the available housing units, because that actually will, I think, tell us a lot, because if that part of the pipeline continues to be pinched, we're just going to continue to have people backed up onto still on the streets or unsheltered or in shelter without a place to go. So I'd love to be able to be regularly looking at how are we doing with that and what changes we might need to make if we, if they're not hitting the production targets and goals that have been set.
Yeah. All right, we're just about done with our hour. So we have one more work session to do today. So thank you so much, Jillian.
Yeah.
Appreciate this. Appreciate the conversation and the questions. It's a lot of good things to follow up on. And so again, the plan is to have these come back to the board in December for approval by this board, and it will also be going to City Council at the time for approval at that body too, so that we have a set of, a plan and a set of guidelines as we're looking forward to our upcoming budget sessions and figuring out how we can actually resource some of the things that we want to see accomplished in the long term with our system. So thank you, Jillian. Thank you to the HRS team who are here in the audience for all of the good work on this. All right, so for our next work session, we are really looking at engaging in a discussion today on how we can strengthen Multnomah County's sanctuary status. We have Salome and Garrett from D2 and my office respectively talking about this today, but I just wanted to start off by saying, in response to the horrific attacks we're seeing in our immigrant communities as a result of federal administration, Commissioner Singleton and I have been working to understand all the options that Multnomah County can take to reaffirm a clear and unequivocal commitment to protecting the rights, dignity, and safety of all community members, especially those of immigrant or refugee status, and that is what Salome and Garrett will be presenting today. Before I turn things over to them, I do want to reiterate that what is currently happening in our community is not normal. In our community and communities all over the country, what we're seeing goes against everything Multnomah County stands for. I have talked to so many community leaders over the past months who have shared that what we're seeing today is unlike anything that they've seen before. We know it's taking a toll on our own community. I was at a farmer's market this weekend, and one of the farmers was sharing how 4 of his employees who had worked there for 15 years for him were taken on their way to work. And so this is not normal. It is not right. We know people are living in fear. They're not accessing services that they need and are entitled to. And while Multnomah County remains committed to our sanctuary promise, which we codified in 2016, I know that there is more that we can do to strengthen our work in response to this moment. I've heard from our service providers, they're so dedicated to the work. They want to work with the county in this response. I've asked the CO's office to really lean into that work. I'm grateful that as a board we share that commitment. I want to thank Commissioner Singleton for her partnership in this work, and I want to pass it over to her for some additional remarks.
Thank you, Chair. This is something I think that has come up in a number of our work sessions and conversations. Since this federal regime has taken over, I've been sharing from the dais the names of people that are being taken from our community, the impacts that we're seeing in our community. We've talked about it in relationship to food. We've talked about it in relationship to accessing our county services. And I think really looking at opportunities to provide complete protection as best we can for the folks that access county services. So I also want to appreciate the staff who have dug in, and I know we'll hear more about the engagement, but talking to a lot of folks because this impacts not just Multnomah County, but Multnomah County properties, which include a lot of other entities like Portland Public Schools, for example. So I look forward to hearing from you all in the conversation so we can take this to the next step and really implement some ways to protect our community members. Thanks.
Well, good morning, Chair, Commissioners. My name is Garrett Pryor, he, him pronouns. I'm the Chair Senior Policy Advisor on Infrastructure.
Omele iwe vosiane ame Salome Chimuku ame vavitunga o Hondeleko o aku Shannon Singleton. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Salome Chimuku. For the record, I am the Policy Advisor to Commissioner Singleton.
Excellent. Well, it's good to be here, but I would say part of me doesn't want to come here this morning. In the past month, because of the skin color and nationality of my and Salome's family, we've had to walk with our nieces and nephews to school. And that's the wild, terrible environment we're in here today. But over the past month or so where Salome and I have been working on this, it's just been amazing to work with this person to my right. The lived experience and the expert knowledge of somebody who's been working on this issue for years now. And so it's great to be here with her today to talk about this. Let's go next slide. So today we'll bring together kind of our compilation of information. It's a very dynamic environment, like the chair and Commissioner Singleton spoke to, of what the previous board action did in 2016, today's environment, research from City of Portland and around the US. Engagement, we did cast a wide net, and so we're gonna pull up kind of what we heard to date. The cost of doing nothing, and then kind of queue you up for some policy options and discussion. And the key outcome of this we're driving towards is a resolution and ordinance, and then some type of funding action or programmatic work that the chair alluded to earlier. Next slide. So in 2016, the board passed, was right after sort of Trump 1.0 election in December of that year, so before took office, a resolution. And so the resolution was really, I think you could see it captured the moment in time around focused on the law enforcement and being very clear with that compliance with state law, but then also the positive affirmations around how county, we want to be access to everyone regardless of that documentation or paperwork, and additionally that commitment to equity and services. So that's kind of that high level overview of what that resolution accomplished at the time. Next slide. Salome.
So I'm just going to go over quickly what we're looking at in terms of today's environment. We know that there has been a significant increase of ICE activity in Multnomah County. In last month alone, there was about 300 community members taken by ICE agents in the state. We are in projection for this month to surpass that number within this month alone. And it has caused different implementation to happen, such as schools going into lockdown due to ICE activity outside the schools. We've had ICE activity outside of county structures and programs, and it's causing a lot of fear, confusion, and decrease in morale within county employees, with great impact to immigrant and refugee employees in particular. And a lot of that has to do with uncertainty of what to do if approached by ICE, or how to navigate our own processes, let alone help a community member navigate them as well. And so in today's environment, we're dealing with I would also say an increase in scam and fraudulent behavior targeting these communities as well. Although many of these community members are choosing to stay home and only leaving when necessary. Next slide, please. So this side, we wanted to call out in particular the work the City of Portland had engaged in last month in October. They adopted a resolution ordinance. Their effort there was to kind of reach the goal that we are intending to reach, which is to codify what they had written in resolution into an updated version of a resolution and also into the city code. It prohibits the use of resources to enforce federal immigration law. It directs city staff to participate in mandatory training, identifies topics for the training content. It also requires signage posted at city-owned and leased spaces, reports to the City Council on progress of employee training and FOIA requests, as well as directs GR to their government relations team to advocate for federal legislation and for the mayor to establish a Protect Portland initiative. This was done in coalition work with many groups such as Latin PDX, IRCO, and some other organizations such as VOS and business owners throughout the city of Portland. Some of these images here are from that day where I know that Commissioner Singleton provided verbal testimony and the chair, you provided written testimony. And so that work was a culmination of community support and community organizing to get it to City Council, using direct feedback that City Council members received from community members, and included a whole host of sponsors at the City Council. Next slide, please.
And I'll just add, we're in conversation with city council staff. They're also bringing this week an ordinance around land use and detention facilities and the impact on community. And then one of the topics, data governance, that we'll speak to, they also are pursuing as well. So we've been trying to do kind of lessons learned and coordination work there. But we looked around the United States at what other places have taken not just the state law, but then codified it locally: New York City, San Francisco, Cook County, Illinois. And then there's been some recent actions on the funding side from City of Hillsborough and Washington County that I'll speak to at the end. But really what that kind of buckets up into, and you'll see we kind of distilled that in our policy options that you'll hear later, but a commitment to access public services and support funding, prohibited the use of local funds, defining more clearly the law enforcement roles and interaction, reviewing information sharing and disclosure, that's that data piece, eliminating detainment and custody holds, and then protecting data sharing or privacy. So those are kind of the main buckets, and we'll see when we get from the language further, really after this meeting, when we get into resolution and ordinance drafting, we'll be able to pull from kind of those repositories and work with our county attorney on that language crafting. I will say recently the City of Hillsborough and Washington County, both from their contingency funds or rainy day funds, passed $200,000 apiece to address the impacts of ICE immigration enforcement in community. Next slide. So engagement, I'll talk about process here for a second, then I'll kick it to Salome. But we casted a wide net, departments, employers. When we get into some of these policy options, if it impacts or changes employee expectations, where we're clearly understood that that has to go through union notification and possible bargaining, community-based organizations. I saw Chris Voss in the back, the wonderful work that Emergency Operations Center has been doing to coordinate work on this. City Council, and even reached out to state representatives. Again, this is a dynamic work environment, but we feel like the policy options that we have on the table here, and would love to hear if we've missed anything, are a good encapsulation of what we've been hearing from community as far as needs are. And then Salome, I'll kick it to you for.
Yeah, and I'll just emphasize when it comes to this engagement piece, we did take an impacted community approach to this engagement piece, so we really prioritize having multiple touch points with the immigrant and refugee employee resource group, along with other immigrant and refugee county employees, as well as the community-based organizations that serve immigrant and refugees, and also those who contract with the county, to really get a centering and a focus on those who would be impacted by action or inaction first. Next slide, please. And so from that feedback, one of the things that we did get was that there was a loud response wanting us to have a slide that talks about the cost of doing nothing. Both Garrett and I have a background in transportation, so we consider this like our kind of LPA of a cost analysis of do nothing and what that would actually cost us. So one of the things that we identified was a weakened trust between county and employees and in the community. What this means is it works both ways, not only a lack of trust between the county and its employees, but a lack of trust between employees of the county and community members towards the county. And so we have to, within that, we heard a lot of feedback of people watching this effort as a kind of seeing if we do what they think we can do and meeting up to their standards of what they would like to see us engage in. The other cost of doing nothing is continued disruption to county employees and services due to people not leaving their homes or not feeling as though meeting with the county, whether it be volunteering for emergency shelter or working with DCJ and seeing their parole officers, or even just coming to DCHS for services as not being a risk worth taking and not feeling that our spaces are safe or that their information is safe with the county. And so we did pull a couple of quotes here that we got from different listening sessions and meetings that we had that kind of stuck with Garrett and I to really describe and encapsulate a lot of the feedback. I will say that a lot of the community members one, felt very surprised that the county was proactively engaging in this work and reaching out to them, but there was a lot of hesitation in the realm of like, well, what can the county do and what does that look like? And that was even felt by some of our county employees.
I'll just say that middle quote on the screen about I'm worried that we're headed toward a path of ethnic cleansing like I experienced before. That you could just feel like that people have come to America and they've seen these steps in their life before. And so that was one that stuck with me. Yep. Next slide. So here we are to our policy options. So what we tried to do in this, you'll see here on the screen, is set up a table. And with these, we tried to do just a real quick vetting of time, cost, and then impacted people, meaning that maybe not the ones that would be responsible, but just trying to cast a wide net of who would be impacted. A lot of good discussions with our wonderful COO, Chris Neal, Jenny Madcore, County Attorney, Department of Community Justice, and the Sheriff's Office. Katie Burgard is here as well today, as well as some of the employee unions as well. So when you see those listed there, those are people who we've talked to and either have self-identified or we've put them on there as like they would be impacted by this work. And we're not here today to get this word perfect, but we would love to identify these are some of these areas, so we would love to hear from you. Where should we explore further? What should be off the list or what should be on? And so now what I'm going to do is kind of walk through the options on this screen, then Salome, and then myself on the next 3 slides. So I think this first slide we bucketed in is kind of that practices and enforcement piece. And the first one here is to clarify the steps that are taken on detainment and custody holds when interacting with federal immigration law enforcement. And I'll say there definitely are questions we're hearing from community and employees about how this works in the justice system with our sheriff's office or DCJ. But what I'm seeing is in this federal onslaught is a pressure testing of this, of not just our law enforcement, but all county departments, of people showing up to homeless shelters or clinics, and so getting that clear protocol on what is that, not just for the people who are most known and regularly interact with ICE or DHS and have to then coordinate with the county attorney's office, but having that knowledge more dispersed and known throughout all departments is a key piece with this first policy option. The second option, identify prohibited use of county funds. That's a little more script of just taking what's in state law, recodifying it, than in county law, so we have that there as well. The next piece down goes to county employees, which we also call out the sheriff's office, commissioner's office, auditor, district attorney, and contractors. So that's a key piece. We're hearing some feedback. I was looking at some of the Emergency Operations Center reports on the feedback we're getting there from people who are contracted by the county and wanting to get more clarity of, if I'm a contractor, does that mean all the same things apply? So that's what this would try to accomplish. The next one down, this goes to that quote you saw earlier about, well, I read in the news that there's a claim that the marshal's office was working with the sheriff's office. Like, what's the accountability there? And we have good explanation from the sheriff's office and from the county attorney about the internal process. They go through that, and that if you're an employee breaking any law, there's repercussions and a system in place. But this would just lean into that to just make sure that's clear and then clearly communicate that to folks so they know that there are checks and balances there. The next one, this is more like future forward casting into terribleness I don't hope we get to, but it will probably or may become, but prevents the county from entering into contracts with the federal government to operate immigration detention centers. And then this final piece here is one we've heard a lot of, again, desire for, but to more clearly identify what are restricted and non-restricted access areas, and then make it clear and it's understood in county employees, what is their role if somebody tries to force their way through or hands paperwork that, oh, yep, here's my warrant, now I want in. Like, they're just clarifying where that's at and the interaction with the county attorney's office then in those decisions.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
I know the issue of using local jurisdictions, parking lots for staging and other areas where obviously that was not the intended purpose of those parking lots, or other settings that were for the use of those accessing services in our residents of Multnomah County, would that be included in that recommendation, that conversation about that?
So thank you for that, Commissioner Moyer. To answer your question, yeah, simply yes, you all can discuss that and craft policy if you'd like that to be included. There is some more space within the state's law and how they're defining access. I know that at the state level, as well as in other counties, they're talking about, does this really apply when people are coming to and from court or to and from an appointment with a government agency, and where does those lines really lie? So yes, there is conversation, and yes, you can make a policy recommendation or a language recommendation that you see fit that would appropriate that. I think to Garrett's point, all of these policy options are just bigger umbrella of topics, and you can get into the weeds on each of them about where you want those lines to be or what you want to define them as. We just kind of tried our best to bucket them for you to help lead conversation. But 100% yes, you can have that discussion, and there is some language from other jurisdictions that we can look at in the nation around how they defined it and why they defined it as such.
Excellent. Let's go to the next slide, and Salome, you're going to take this one.
Yeah, so these policy options we kind of lumped as support. These options also really dug into a lot of the feedback that we got from county employees as well as folks who contract with the county and what they would like to see happen. So that's why this one you can see a lot of HR related type of options here. So the first one is to identify provisions to ensure that all residents, regardless of immigration status, can access county services and programs. The next one is to allow international telework on workday for immigrant employees making their way to county employment. This also kind of include folks who are currently employed by the county having to travel for work visa to renewal purposes. I did get to send this to the chair and my own boss, Commissioner Singleton, so apologies, Commissioner Moyer and Commissioner Brim Edwards. I did not get to send this link to you, but a few weeks ago, the federal government did make a decision to cancel, effective immediately, automatic extension of visa. And so normally what happens is if you apply to renew your visa, you get an automatic extension to allow for the process to occur. The federal government has taken that away. So when your visa expires, that is just the date it expires, even if you are in process of renewal. And so that really does impact a lot of families and individuals, because oftentimes those folks have to travel to their country of entry point to renew. They can't just be inside the US there's some very few exceptions to that, but that is something that was brought to our attention. The next one is report on the cost to the county to fund or provide technical support to help employees with visas. At a certain point long ago, the county did provide some technical assistance. That work was contracted out. And so this is just an idea of hey, let's take a look at what that would cost if we wanted to bring that back to the county now that we are in a state of ever-changing immigration policies and laws. The next one is to provide county-specific training for employees on sanctuary status and resources and rights. This is similar to the work that we spoke about earlier at the city of Portland, where obviously if we pass anything, we should be training county employees on what does that mean in practicality for them and what does it mean to operationalize that in their work. The next one is to create a leave bank that can be accessed for those who have to travel internationally for bereavement or visa renewal. Right now, again, with the automatic extensions being ended, but also because of these individuals in the county who might have family members who live internationally, allowing them to leave for that travel and getting access to the leave, having a leave bank for that, where folks can be reaching out to other employees to ask for additional support so they can make that travel. The last one here is to clarify that access to county programs and services are accessible without requiring disclosure of immigration status. I just want to point out to this one is that we did talk with and get some feedback from the health department as well as other departments that have culturally specific programs. So for those programs, we would still ask that question as eligibility for said program since it's culturally specific, but like in other places where it's kind of like a not necessary information, leaving that as optional or not collecting that on purpose so that way we don't have those documents in case of subpoena. So it's kind of just taking an assessment of what is necessary and where isn't necessary to collect that information, but also allowing for there to be disparity reports and such if it's helpful to the work or it's culturally specific. Next slide, please. The first one up here is a typo. It says clear identify spaces of restricted access. That actually should say signage placed to clearly identify county sanctuary policy and resources. So what that would mean is signage in our county structures and building where we have county employees or the contractors to state what the county's policy is and the procedures there and not expect people to just memorize them after getting a training. Similar to how you see BOLI signage about employee rights, this would be that kind of level of signage of information, but then also signs with resources for community members to see that have things like the hotline support, any sort of legal supports that are out there, or food assistance and such that is related to folks impacted by ICE or immigration. So I just want to clarify that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I have the last one here around the data privacy piece. So I think what we're seeing is just a pressure test to all of our systems and sources. So if we think about the public records request system or FOIA or health department, human services, transportation cameras. So this would just give a little eye towards like what are those protections that are in place now today about if we did get a big data request for specifically identifiable information. And Salome did out me as a transportation nerd. I wrote and spent a year and a half working with Commissioner Fine, Washington County, on all the tolling rules and administrative. And you can think about all the data that's about to be collected on Interstate Bridge, on license plates, and specifically identified cars. And we were able to build into kind of the statewide rules on that, like clearly you need a warrant, you need a court order, you need this specificity to then even receive any of that said data. So that's the kind of eye we would want to take a look to what's happening at the county as well with data things. So next slide. And we're almost good here. So these are some initial thoughts, these first two bullet points on how we would organize this resolution ordinance-wise. This is based on some good feedback from our county attorney about how the county is set up. But the resolution would capture the history, why now, and cover all the topic areas or issues. The ordinance would pull out specifically what are those issues raised in the resolution that directly pertain and would direct the county's role in this. And then this final bullet point here is around the financial aid and any adjustments to outcomes, that work that we're hearing to support our service providers and community. Last slide.
So here we have some discussion questions to lead this next half hour or so. What we have left, happy to answer any questions. The first are, is there any actions that we missed that you want to make sure that we highlight, or do you have any specifics in terms of policies that you'd like us to do further research on? Are there any actions that you don't want to see included? And overall, again, just getting guidance on next steps in terms of the work that we'll pull. And so I would just emphasize, like, we don't need to do the work today of like what goes in the resolution and what goes in the ordinance. I think first we want to hear about what policies you want us to start exploring and drafting language for, and what does that look like for you, so we can then do that ground level work and bring back to you recommendations on what we think would be best served in the ordinance and what would best serve in resolution.
Thank you both so much for all the work on this. And I know that you've talked to many people like in the community, at the county, and at the city, and others to really engage in this. So I just want to thank you so much for the in-depth. I really appreciate seeing kind of all the options laid out. This, I think, is a really great way to set up a board conversation about potential policy that we want to take action on. So thank you for that. I would just want to be really clear when we talk about the provider support actions, that really is looking at, like, do we want to make a budget modification to do, take dollars out of contingency or from some other area to provide resources for the need in our community, like we've seen from other things, just to be really crystal clear about that. Okay, with that, I will open it up for discussion.
I'm not sure if, I didn't say this, and I might encourage an addition, a look at our internal policies, and many of which I think we did during COVID, so I don't think there'll be a lot of low-hanging fruit, but are we making county services accessible to those who are homebound for any reason? And are we making it clear how someone can access services from their home if they are unable to come to a location?
I just wanted to note that Commissioner Jones-Dixon has joined us, so welcome. Thank you for being here, Commissioner.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Moyer. We'll definitely take a note of that. I will point out with that particular issue, it did vary from department to department. So what that looked like for the DA looks a little different than what that would look like for the health department. But it is conversations to have, because that does impact a lot of services throughout the county. And so, it is really good to figure out a way to work with the departments to identify what are the things that have to be done in person, what are the things that could be done hybrid or could be done virtual, and also, do they have to take place in a county building or office, or is there some place that maybe those community members feel safer that we can conduct that business in? So I think, yes, we'll definitely take a look at that and try to gather that information for you.
So one of the things that I just want to highlight is when we're having conversations with departments and with other elected officials around this policy, I want the conversation to be framed in what it will take to do it, as opposed to why they can't do it. And part of why that flip of framing is helpful is it tells us if there's resource need, but it's still, I want to have the policy conversation without having just what the barriers to it are. And again, if it might be, we can't do this because it costs $1 billion, like that's the conversation for us to have, not for it to be blocked at a department or other elected official office level.
Thank you, Commissioner, for that. That was definitely expressed in some of our conversations with especially county employees, to be honest. A lot of them felt frustration around asking for things for a number of months or a number of years and hearing no, but not feeling they got enough of an answer back of like, what is the delta there? Like, what is the need? And if it isn't a complete and ultimate no, how do we mitigate? And so I definitely will take note of that and bring that to the department discussions.
So if I can go, I want to start by thanking the staff for the presentation today. I think the thoroughness of sort of the background, the options, what other cities and jurisdictions are doing was super helpful. So thank you. I thought it sets us up really well for this conversation. I'm very supportive. Just to clarify, I want to make sure that I understand what the action is. Do it. We're already sort of a sanctuary county based on a resolution that was passed. This would sort of create sort of enhancements on what that looks like and updates. And it would move at least a portion of it from the sort of resolution to ordinance. Is that correct? Or was something in 2016?
Yeah. So that is mostly correct, Commissioner. In 2016, at the time that was Commissioner Smith brought this forward, and funny enough, I was in her office at that time, and so that resolution was very much so done in what I would say in an emergency type of way, and so it identified some quick areas, but the resolution itself was pretty quiet about what it meant for the actual county employees, what was the expectation. And so a lot of that got handled in a non-public facing way, which I believe led to the situation we're in currently, where we do have policies, but they might differ per department and people don't know about it. So it's like the idea of like, what's the point of having something amazing and great if no one knows it exists? And so a lot of this effort is to strengthen what the resolution was quieter about, take on new issues the resolution was completely silent on, and also bring this to the public forefront to show the solidarity with community members and our employees.
Great. So I am very much in agreement with the spirit of what you've brought forward, and I really appreciate it. And I do think sometimes people say, well, things are, it's about symbolism, which is important, and I think it also sends a message to our employees. But I also appreciate that there's some very concrete actions that we've been presented with. And I'm not sure how you want us to go through this. I guess from a high level, one of the questions I had is like just about the cost. You had both low and mid, and I'm wondering, just at a very high level, can you define what low cost is and what mid cost is, just to get a sense of?
Yeah, I don't even know if we thought about numbers really, or like a threshold there.
Okay.
I would say though, to add to that, the reason why we use the analysis of low and to mid is low level costs were things that we identified that were had existing county actions or things going on that the county was already doing. So it was the idea that to implement this would cost a lower amount. So it might be that there's a need for one-time funding, or a lot of the work is already being done by many departments or accounted for in their budgets. Or it was a cost in which it might be ongoing, but the cost to do more, depending upon what you decide as the specific policy, might make it transition from low cost to mid. And so without the specifics on what you want on each policy, it would be impossible to give you a number, because you might come back and say, we want signage, but we want postcards. And that's different than a giant poster or like a running digital posting. So it was kind of like our best bet to be like, okay, what are some things that are already existing that could be absorbed with an already existing cost for the most part, or might need some initial startup costs. The mid stuff was things that we identified that would definitely go across departments, would definitely need an implementation budget, and might potentially have ongoing budget. So it was our best way of kind of giving you an idea of like, what is not only the monetary cost, but also the administrative cost to do these things. So it's kind of that blending as the best we could.
And I'll just say quickly to build off that, we tried to learn feedback directly from departments on what would this be, high cost, low cost, what's your level of concern? And we have some things with the concealed carry we just passed, and the DCA and the signage and that distribution there, or things like standing up a new training and work day and posting it on the, like, so to Salome's point, like things that the county have done before, maybe a little more known muscle there, versus the mid were things that were just more undetermined. And so we just put that as far as like, undetermined there.
Great. There wasn't a bad answer. I was just wondering if there was something like anything under 500,000, would be low. So here's just my overall reaction. Like I love this list. I appreciate there's some concrete actionable items. I don't think there's anything on here that I would say like, oh, I don't know that we need to do that, or something that I wouldn't support. So that would be my general feedback. I think the thing that would be useful for me, sort of the next click down, would be what items on this list of actions would have the biggest positive impact, if we can, group them in those categories, because some of these may impact a very small group of employees, be important, but a small group, and other ones could be like this would have a very broad positive impact. So getting a sense just in terms of if we were to sequence things, or from a budgetary standpoint, look how we're going to fund them, that would be helpful. And then the other question I would have is on all this list of policies, are there things that like tomorrow we could implement because we already have like infrastructure? And, just given the, I think, increased terror that is rippling across the county and across the state with increased ICE activity and just the violence with which is happening. Are there things that we could do right away, and so then some longer term things that we need to get rolling, but there are things that we could do tomorrow that would actually have a positive impact for people. So those would be my questions. And again, I really appreciate the thoroughness and the sets of recommendations that you brought forward for policy options.
Yeah, thank you for that, Commissioner. I guess I'm trying to understand the first bit a little bit deeper because I want to make sure that I'm getting it right. When we're talking about the type of impact, I think there's a matrix to have there in terms of like what it would mean for us versus what it would mean for the community members, but also the matrix of who this really impacts. To give you an example, right now with the ICE activity, due to the population size, we are really focused on the Latinx community because it is the largest and one of the more visible immigrant and refugee communities. But there's also the fact that Black immigrants are disproportionately deported at a higher rate. And so it's, even though they're a smaller amount of the community. And so I want to make sure that when we talk about impacts that we're explicit on how we're looking at it, because I think there's many ways to pull that word into different areas. And so I'll definitely reach out to you and your team to try to make sure that I'm getting you what you need in terms of how you want to see those impacts laid out, to make sure that I'm not missing anything and that we're kind of on the same page on what we mean by greatest impacts or bigger impacts.
And then, Commissioner, to the second part of your question, I think I was hoping to take out of this meeting direction and then get with Chris Neal to talk about some pencil sharpening to understand that, hone in those numbers on low, medium, and timing and impact and process.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the sort of expansion of what impact means. And I think I would be looking to you all to bring that forward. Just another example is, for example, the Vietnamese community, which is substantial in the Portland area, has not been as impacted as it has been in, say, California. There is a huge targeting of the Vietnamese community. And I think we can expect things to, evolve, not in good ways. So I appreciate your question. I think I was thinking in terms of, again, not that the impact in terms of like how you would sequence it, not that you wouldn't not do something. But just sequence it, like what are the things that could be done right now that could have the biggest impact, and keep moving through the list, but in a sequenced way, because there's a lot of things on this list, and knowing that from a capacity standpoint, it wouldn't, like tomorrow everything couldn't move ahead. So I think that is, hopefully that's helpful, and just in terms of what I'm
that's definitely helpful, Commissioner. And I think that even when we talk about sequencing, I'll bring forward some of those items, but I'll just highlight that it really depends on how much trust Multnomah County has in some of these policy areas in terms of the community partners that we have. I think it also just, really talks again about the appetite that the board has for some of these things that might make some things push quicker or take longer. And so I'll try my best to matrix some of that for you and to give you a full contextual picture, so that way you can make informed decisions that you see fit, and I get you what you're asking for.
I know that we do not dictate the policies of the DA's office or the sheriff's office per se, but I do get questions about how our DA's office or our jail or the areas in which we are in charge of law enforcement do or do not respond to or intervene or coordinate. And I've certainly had my opportunity to ask questions, but I do wonder how we should be communicating what those lines are, because I think there's confusion of what an ICE hold is versus like a U.S. Marshal hold for somebody who may be standing trial for at our federal court, and that is a distinctly very different type of issue. I am personally confused about what is the role of law enforcement when the community sees something happening and the individuals are either not identifying themselves or the actions that they are engaged in are a clear violation of somebody's civil rights. And I'm not a legal expert. I know you cannot interfere with the execution of federal law enforcement, but can you interfere if what a federal law enforcement officer is doing is clearly illegal? Like if you are assaulting someone, I don't know the answer, but I get asked these questions and
Thank you for that question, Commissioner Moyer. First off, you're not alone in that questioning and that wondering. It is a ever-evolving space that it has a lot of moving parts. I will say that our folks, and when I say law enforcement, I'm including anybody who can enforce the law, have a tightrope that they have to walk. And I know that they are in daily communications with the county attorney's office and with their own internal to talk about what do we do in these specific situations. We're already in that space where the frequency of that has heightened because of the fact that they're trying to balance what county says with what the state says with what the federal government is saying and asking of them. And so that's just a reality that they live in that I don't envy and never want to be in. And also that same kind of analysis is where we find our county employees in, of what is required from me for my job, what is state policy and what is county policy, what is happening right now in front of my face. And so I think that is a place where everyone is at as we are moving with these conversations. I think that we have to accept that there are going to be some murky areas, some gray areas, because things are ever evolving. And also, there's this whole conversation happening on top of a perception issue. Because again, if we can have the best policy in the world, but if no one hears about it, no one knows about it, and they can't articulate it to the person next to them, then it may not have the impacts that we want in community and help build that trust and repair harm. Because as some of you may know, before these policies were in place, there were things were happening that built a perception. And that's why we have that perception, and that's something that we should keep in mind as we're doing these policies and moving them forward. I do want to allow for Katie from the Sheriff's Department to add to that if she would like, but that is a reality and that is feedback that we did get.
So I think one piece of it gets answered in the or that we would start to dig into is in that first line around clarifying the steps that are taken. There is a secondary piece that's like, a bit of it is the know your rights stuff, right? And how are we making sure that people know and have access to the legal representation they might need? And then some of it feels like it's about city law enforcement, because that's where a lot of this happens, and how might those intersect? So I don't know, as you all are working with the city, as they're kind of pulling these pieces together, it would be helpful to just ask, are they unpacking some of this and kind of where are they going with it to answer some of those questions? But I think the things that we can control, I see in here that I definitely want us to dig further into, because it may not be that we're it's less about setting policy for them, but about clarifying what their policy or process is that I think might be helpful.
And to add to that, this also, in my opinion, will impact other departments, because the idea that we might not be in a space in the future where they're making calls to our different service providers who have like residential housing or transitional housing, asking them like, hey, is this person here? Can you tell them to wait for me? And that kind of soft asking of other departments to do what we consider holds, maybe a future we find ourselves in. And so I think that we want to make sure that whatever policies we do put in place, that we can make sure that other areas where people may be asked to hold individuals have clarity as well.
Yeah. Commissioner Jones-Dixon, did you have any questions or comments to this?
Yeah, I do, and I do apologize if I drop. I'm on the train en route to Eugene. I'm supportive of everything on everything that you presented. I think we should prioritize everything that's on slide 9. And also just wanted to say thank you, Salome, for your leadership on this, and Gary as well. I've fished this out to some of the local community members to get their feedback. So my office will circle back with you, Salome, as far as additional feedback.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thanks. So I had a couple of thoughts. One is, and I don't know if time was kind of a way that time was being used to also acknowledge complexity, but I think that is something that I would be interested in understanding more about each of these things, is what is actually the complexity of maybe doing something or else. And if time, obviously it can sometimes be a substitute or a placeholder for that, but just like really understanding the complexity. Obviously, when you have long time and a lot of impacted people, that usually things are more complex, but just as we're thinking about policy, that would be a helpful thing for me to understand. And then I just wanted to note something, and this is not in relation to any specific policy in there, but there is one that I think is talking about, clarifying, I don't even say it right now, but I think it's identify provisions to ensure that all residents, regardless of immigration status, can access county services and programs, and that is 100% true, right? Like that is something that has been a value. I think there's also this, because I saw this in the situation report update, the SITREP report around the EOC, about like how do we ensure that people can that people can safely access county services, and I bring that up because I think that's really difficult for any local body, organization, whatever can do in this environment, is to ensure that people can safely access things. I think what I really appreciate here is like we're thinking about all the different ways that we can pivot to make sure that it is as safe as possible for people to access those services, but we know how, we've seen what's happened with schools. We have seen what's happened with people who are driving to work. We've seen with people, happening with maybe not in our parking lots, but near our facilities where people are, where we have had immigration folks. And so there's that fine line between like making everything as safe as possible and also like knowing like we cannot in this environment, unfortunately, guarantee people's safety. And that's really hard because we want to do that, but so I just appreciate that, but I also wanted to just note it because of where we are, and I think how we communicate to the public about what we're doing and all the things and the best ways that people can access and and also understanding like, and this is a very real thing in our, that is happening right now all across our country here in Multnomah County that we are trying to push back against, and the force of what they're trying to do in our community to our community is not, we cannot stop it completely.
I really appreciate that, Chair, because I think that, especially with that first one, we need to really look at how are we defining access and how are we defining services and policies, because one particular thing that you can give as an example is, access to visitation in our jails. And is the disruption of ICE and preventing people from wanting to go because they don't feel safe? Is that a disruption of us to be able to provide services that folks would normally have access to if they felt safe and comfortable? And so I do appreciate that, because it does look different upon each department about what is access and what is the services, and how do we try to mitigate in places where we can't eliminate barriers.
One thing, oh, go ahead.
And just because we've been talking about the sheriff's office so much, I did want to just note that Katie Bogart is here in the audience. So I appreciate her being here to listen to this conversation.
One thing I do think is missing is, it was talked about earlier in the slides, but it's not in our table, is this component of flexibility for existing contractors. So this is something I talked with the chair about a while ago, was client assistance has always been very flexible category of dollars. And are we clear that how flexible that is? Is there additional flexibility we need to provide right now for folks to be able to meet the needs of the households? Right, I very rarely would have bought food, so I might not know that that's an allowable use. So that's something that I do think is missing, is a little bit of, in addition to virtual access, how are we giving that flexibility? And then I appreciate that, I think you mentioned, we've heard from providers, a desire to have some flexibility about outcome goals. And that's so broad, it's hard to get real specific on, but there's something there that I would love for us to know, like we're actually working on and working through at a contract level. Because, for example, I'll just use a housing example. If we come to this COC conversation and suddenly we have to pivot a lot of local resources to do eviction prevention because of HUD changing its rules, we have to change the contract goals to allow that to happen, because right now people are on the hook for new placements. And so there's a little bit of, how are we doing that? What's the guidance we're giving to the providers to be able to do that work and actually meet the needs of their households?
Really appreciate that, Commissioner Singleton, because this also came up in conversations of goals and access for Reimagining Justin Cully, or other access where we typically are even at the very level of how much information are we gathering about who was there and who attended whatever event or whatever training, and even for our own things around something as simple as providing refreshments, where right now we have to get printed name and a signature. It's like, what do we do if we're having a training or conversation that is with specifically immigrant and refugee community members, and do we change what our reporting is or what our goals are around that effort to accommodate what we see is happening in terms of data collection? And so I do appreciate that, because that is something that we do need to think about as we're considering these different policies around data privacy and our outcomes and KPIs.
Well, I think it's not necessarily about the data collection. That's totally critical. And this is, if I have X amount of dollars for client assistance and those dollars come with, you must prevent evictions for 10 households and provide food assistance for 5, whatever those are, as the needs change, I need to be able to change my outcomes. And that's the piece that I think is really tricky, because we give people specific outcomes based on the dollar allocation and what we see in the budget and what the program offer says. And there's a flexibility in what somebody might need that I don't think we provide. It's not in our contracts now. And so that's the question for me, is if somebody, instead of needing rent assistance, actually needs dollars to help support legal services, is that something that we have? How do we support those sorts of asks? Does that actually provide the stability that that household needs? Like, there's just a there that I think we've got to explore more, and not just for our contractors, obviously, for our own departments who are providing direct services. It feels like that's a little tricky and sticky, but I think it's something that is able to be implemented a little more quickly than anything else we're seeing here, and they could be doing now to support households.
Yes, definitely. We'll add that to the list, and I'll work with the chair and COO team on how those conversations are going.
Yeah, and we are actively in those conversations, so we can provide some updates on that. Okay, I think we have, I don't see anyone else popping up on the mic. Thank you again so much for all of this work. Really appreciate this. I know you'll be following up on what you've heard today from the board, and as we're bringing forward more, adding more detail, I think, to some of these policy decisions and policy options for the board to consider. Just appreciate this. And I really wanted to say how much I appreciate the shared values on this board, that we for the county to be showing up in the best way possible, both within our organization and how we're resourcing and really taking this on internally, but also working with our larger community, our providers and our partners on this. And this is a really great step for that. So thank you.
And acknowledging that we took nothing off the list, but added things to the list.
Yeah, we may.
Don't expect anything to be like turned around tomorrow, but just to say it out loud, please be communicating with us about resource need to be able to move this work forward.
Yes, thank you. Okay, that concludes today's meeting. Our next meeting will be our regular board meeting scheduled for Thursday, November 20th at 9:30 a.m. Please note, this will be an entirely virtual meeting. There being no further business, we are adjourned.